Hello everyone, welcome to Black Fog, your guide for drifting off. I know you listen to help you fall asleep, so like and subscribe to Black Fog before we start. Where are you from and what's your time? Now get comfortable and relax. I'm just about to be discharged from the hospital. Broken arm, broken clavicle, 19 stitches in my scalp, and all kinds of fun little cuts where they dug glass shards out of me. Also, my Civic is totaled. I've been driving for Uber in the LA area for almost 6 months now. Believe me when I say I've got plenty of stories already. But this one takes the cake and then some. My cousin is a screenwriter and he couldn't come up with some shit like this. And not just because all he writes are low-budget Christmas movies about business girls who go back to their hometowns to fall in love with a guy in a peacoat. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what even happened to me. 2 nights ago, I was cruising around in the Culver City area after dropping off a passenger. It was about 1:45 a.m. and I was ready to quit and go home. But another ride popped up over in Palms, which was close. There was no destination entered, which maybe should have been a red flag, but I took it anyway. I started heading over there and almost got T-boned by a string of cop cars that blasted through a red light going 90 to somewhere. A couple streets over I crossed paths with an ambulance. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but when I got to my destination, some empty side street in Palms, and rolled down my window, it hit me just how many sirens I could hear. Way more than usual. And choppers too. There's always a few of those fuckers buzzing around, but this seemed extra. I figured there must be some kind of high-speed pursuit or manhunt or shooting or something. I sat there parked at the curb for a while, waiting for this dude to come down from his apartment. The app said his name was Eric, and Eric was taking his sweet time. He lived in one of those old complexes, former military housing that was probably slapped together in the 40s, and was now owned by some LA slumlord who charged his tenants $2,500 per month for a little 1-bedroom unit. While I was sitting there getting impatient, I saw a few people sprinting across the street about a block ahead of me, lit up orange in the glow of the streetlights. Not going for a jog either, they were running as fast they could go, like someone was chasing them. And I could hear someone hollering, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. They ran out of sight, and then the street went quiet again except for that distant wail of sirens, and it was about that time when I started feeling really uneasy. Something in the air felt off, and suddenly the hair on my arms was standing up on end. My attention was fully fixed on that eerie, empty street ahead. So Eric scared the holy shit out of me when he yanked open my back door and said, "Are you Wes?" I told him I was, and he piled into the back seat and slammed the door shut. Immediately, I could tell something was wrong. He was huffing and puffing like he'd just been running, covered in sweat, but most importantly, he had a blood-soaked t-shirt balled up against his neck. "Take me to the nearest hospital," he said. Then he reached over and hit the lock button on the door, which was a weird thing to do. I was like, "Dude, you don't look so good." And he goes, "No kidding. That's why I need to get to a hospital. I really didn't want to deal with this." So I said, "Hey man, maybe we better call you an ambulance." "No, I can't afford an ambulance. Just go, okay? Hurry up. I'm bleeding here." The thing was, I don't think he had even looked at me once during this exchange because he was too busy looking back at the dark windows of that looming apartment complex. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, but I went ahead and found the nearest hospital on my Maps app. It was about 7 minutes away, maybe less if we hopped on the 10 freeway for a short stretch, which I intended to do. "Come on, let's go," he said, and I could hear fear in his voice. I hit the gas and took off. I watched him in the mirror as he craned his head all the way around to look out the back window at the big dark brick of his apartment complex falling away behind us. Only when it was fully out of sight did he turn forward. I took a few turns, heading for the nearest freeway on-ramp, and for a while we both stayed silent. I could hear him wheezing in the back seat. Every breath seemed labored. I caught glimpses of his face in the passing lights. His skin looked pale and sweat was beaded up on his forehead. He looked scared and sick. I suddenly wished I'd had another face mask. I usually wore them while driving so passengers didn't give me COVID all the time, especially since I was still struggling after my last infection. But the strap had broken on my mask earlier that day. We hit a stoplight. Nobody else was at the intersection, and we sat there waiting for nothing. I considered running it, but then a police chopper banked low overhead and I thought better of it. "So, what happened?" I asked. I caught his glance in the mirror. He looked like he had just remembered I was in the car with him. He spoke with a pained, sluggish intonation, barely moving his jaw to form the words. "Someone attacked me." "Oh shit. Who?" "My neighbor." I woke up because I thought I heard something in my apartment. Got up and found the dude standing in my living room, completely naked. "What? Are you serious?" The light turned green and I took off again. Eric didn't elaborate for a moment, but then I think he felt my eyes on him in the mirror. He was bleeding too. Honestly, I knew this guy was a bubble off when I moved into the place, but it wasn't a big deal because he kept to himself. But not tonight. No. Tonight he decided to break into my place and flap his weird little peener around in the middle of my living room. "What did you do?" I didn't know what to do. He was talking crazy, jabbering at me. Before I could really do anything, he jumped on me and he bit me. "He bit you?" "Yeah, pretty bad too." Then he ran off. "Jesus Christ." "Yeah." He shook his head like he couldn't believe it himself. The action seemed to hurt his wounded neck and he grimaced. I dreaded how much blood he was probably getting on my seats. I almost missed my next turn on account of watching him in the mirror. He leaned back in his seat and groaned softly. He really looked bad. I started to get worried that this guy might end up dying in my back seat, so I put on a little more speed. A fire truck strobed through an intersection up ahead and disappeared from view as I brought the car to a brief halt at a stop sign. Something above me caught my eye and I leaned forward to look. There was an object perched on the long goose neck of the nearest streetlight. It was one of those older streetlights, probably from the 90s, with a sodium vapor bulb that cast an orange disc on the street below. Whatever was on top of it was large, and at first it struck me as a nonsensical mass of cloth balanced impossibly up there. But a split second later, it struck me as the shape of a crouching man. "What the hell?" I said out loud, and I could hear Eric shift in his seat behind me to look out the window. I was already rationalizing that a man crouched on top of a streetlight like a vulture was a completely idiotic notion and that I must be mistaken, when the thing moved and I could clearly make out the shape of a stooped head and arms and, most alarmingly, eyes. 2 pinpricks of reflected light, like the retinas of a wild animal. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. "Go! Go now! Go!" I jumped at the sound of Eric's panicked voice behind me, and without thinking I hit the gas. We shot off down the street, and although I tried to pick out the figure on the streetlight in my mirror, it was immediately obscured by a tangle of jacaranda branches. "What was that?" I asked. Hearing the fearful strain in my own voice made my heart pump even faster. But Eric didn't respond. Instead, he was writhing around on my back seat, moaning softly. I took another turn and spotted a sign for the freeway on-ramp ahead. Eric's movements were becoming spastic. I felt him thump against the backrest of my seat. More pained moaning. Christ, this dude's totally gonna give up the ghost in the back of my car. "Hey man, just hang on. We're almost there. Keep pressure on it and, just keep pressure on it." A tortured cry and a scuffling sound from the back seat. Then abrupt silence. I glanced in my mirror again to see Eric's shape in silhouette. He was sitting bolt upright now, still as a statue. I was taken aback by the abrupt change in behavior. I could hear him take a deep inhale through his nose, like someone meditating. Then he spoke. "Oh, negative." His voice was totally calm now, calm and low. It sent a chill up my spine. I hit the on-ramp and we started the short climb to the elevated freeway, putting on speed. I instantly regretted it because I couldn't pull over as easily on the freeway if I needed to. "Sorry, what?" I said. "Euro negative. Universal donor." "What?" He was right. I was O negative, but how in the James Randy fuck could he possibly know that? I've lost a lot of blood. I could use some O negative right about now, he said, and his voice was all thick and croaking like he was some pervert trying to talk me out of my clothes. Dude, you're freaking me out, I said, and then this piece of shit giggled. He actually giggled, like some little schoolgirl who was up to no good. I was starting to panic, and merging onto the freeway was a clumsy blur. Thankfully, there was very little traffic at that hour. I kept looking in the mirror, but I couldn't make out his face, just the shape of his head framed against the rear window. I could see him pull the bloody t-shirt away from his neck, and then he made a strange hissing noise like air through a hose. I've got a hole in my neck, he said in a raspy, matter-of-fact tone. I can breathe right through it. I realized I was drifting out of my lane at about 60 miles per hour, and I numbly corrected course. Before I could think of anything to say, Eric seemed to snap into a completely different mood, or maybe a completely different personality. He doubled over and started whimpering. Oh, God, what's happening to me? What's happening? Hey, just try to stay calm. Hang on. We're like 2 minutes away, I said. Oh God, it hurts, it burns. He kept whimpering and moaning, twisting and writhing in shadow behind me, his knees thumping the back of my seat like that awful little kid who has sat behind me on every flight I've ever taken. Suddenly, he sat up straight again with a strange animal huff. Dead silence. I tried to glance over my shoulder, but I had to keep my eyes on the road to navigate a curve in the freeway as it ramped up into an arching overpass.
yogur.
I asked lamely. No response, just the sound of, well, I guess air wheezing through that hole in his throat. I put on speed, quickly passing a couple of slower moving cars. The exit, it's coming right up, I said, as much to myself as to Eric. Then he spoke again, and not in a way that I liked. I'm gonna kill you, but you're not gonna die. His voice was grating and filled with a malice that made my skin crawl and my throat tighten. Hey man, just take it easy. There's no problem here, I stammered. I'm gonna drink the life right out of you, O negative. My heart hammered in my chest. I willed myself to sit up straighter in my seat, to crimp my face into my best Clint Eastwood scowl. Look, buddy, I don't want to have to do it, but I was taught Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu by an actual Brazilian, and I can bend you into a pretzel if it comes to it. So let's just stay cool here. And you know what? This ride is officially over. I'm gonna pull over now and you can. I looked up at the mirror again and my heart stopped. The back seat was empty. I grabbed the mirror and tilted it to make sure I wasn't missing anything. But he was just gone. Was this motherfucker lying on my floor now? And that's when I felt his breath on my cheek, cold like a draft from an open freezer door and reeking of some distant rot that I couldn't place. I froze, my hands stone clubs on the steering wheel, as he wheezed softly into my ear for one long, agonizing moment. I started to turn my head, inching my eyes over to look, not minding that my Civic was drifting across lanes. Eric's face was right next to mine, but this was not the same man I had picked up. This was some twisted, nightmarish version of him. This dude's flesh was pale as death. His lips had turned black and they were peeled back in a grin or a grimace. I don't know which, exposing teeth that looked like they'd somehow all been filed down to these gnarled little points. I didn't get a good assessment of the guy's dental situation when he first got into the car, but I can tell you that he didn't look like this, like a fucking shark. But the worst part was his eyes. They were murky blood red pools with no pupil and no iris, and they seemed swollen and bulging in a way that reminded me of that Popeye thing that my fish had not long before it died. Just below his chin, his neck folded strangely with bloodied flesh that was chewed and pockmarked by someone else's teeth. Neither of us moved for another split second. He sucked air in equally through his nose and his throat whole like he was smelling me. Then all hell broke loose. He lunged forward, grabbing at me, clawing at me, snarling and rasping. Felt like getting attacked by a big dog. I don't know shit about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I fought for my life, letting go of the steering wheel so I could wail on this guy with both hands as he tried to bite my throat with those cannibal teeth. An instant later, we had slammed into the concrete barrier on the edge of the freeway, pitched up and sideways, and then we were sailing airborne off the side of the overpass. That fall felt like 100 years. I saw the moon go by the windows, fat and yellow. The car rolled in the air, all my shit went airborne, and I found myself momentarily amazed by how much stuff I actually had in there. It all seemed to happen in slow motion, and I felt like I had time to consider many different aspects of my predicament as we fell. Eric wasn't buckled in, so he hit the roof, then the door, then the other door, then the roof again. Then asphalt that was bathed in that smoky streetlight orange was rushing up to meet us, and that was it. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital. The instant I regained consciousness, I thrashed around like I had just landed in boiling water, knocked over an 4-stand, and kicked a nurse so hard in the can that she yelped and ran across the room. "You're lucky to be alive." That's what they told me, and I couldn't agree more. But what really fucked me up was when the doctors told me that I had been alone in the car when the cops showed up. The paramedics had pulled me out of the wreck, but the way the doctors told it, there hadn't been hide nor hair of a passenger on the scene. Almost immediately, I felt like they didn't believe me. I asked if they'd found the bloody t-shirt Eric had been holding against his neck, but nobody in the hospital knew anything about that. Later on, a characteristically dismissive cop showed up, mostly to judge me for wrecking my car. He didn't have any additional information, and he stated flatly that they had found me in a wreck that should have killed me, and that if someone had actually been in the car with me, they had miraculously survived as well and apparently fled the scene. Whatever the case, I guess Eric hadn't taken the time to bite the throat out of my unconscious body while I was dangling upside down from my seatbelt. My mother was notified that I was in the hospital, and she jumped on a plane from Texas to come see me. She's supposed to be landing in about an hour. My cousin is my only family member who lives in the area, but he's apparently in Canada right now on the set of Business Girl, goes back to her hometown for Christmas, and falls in love with a guy in a Peacoat 6. No matter. All things considered, my injuries are pretty manageable. Of course, there are other issues to contend with now, namely figuring out what the hell just happened. What the hell is currently happening? It's not just this Eric guy who went all demon mode on me in the car. It's everything. All the sirens, the police, the ambulances, the fire trucks, the choppers, the people fleeing across the street, the fucking dude perched on the light pole like a 6-foot owl. As I sit here in my hospital room, there's an electric current of quietly unfolding disaster in the city around me. The hospital staff is bustling, and although nobody wants to give me the time of day about it, I can tell they're being inundated with a rash of new patients. Cops are marching up and down the hallways. I can hear screaming from a room nearby. Not 20 minutes ago, a squadron of military choppers just roared by the window on their way to do God knows what. And sure, you could probably explain that all away, but it really comes down to a feeling in my gut. I've used my phone to search online, and I've found some people on social media talking about some weird stuff that's just happened to them. Some of it bears more than a passing resemblance to what I've described here. Talk of ghouls, talk of vampires, talk of some kind of nightmarish supernatural epidemic. Perhaps even more disturbing are the hordes of people who have shown up to tell these folks that they're full of shit. And officially, there's nothing. No articles, no news reports, no government announcements.
Nada, Filch.
It's like the authorities have committed to telling us nothing, and the general public has committed to pretending that everything is fine and normal. But I'll bet my life that something is happening here. Something big, something hellish, and it's going to come boiling out into the open very soon. It's already in the air. I've never felt more sure of anything. If you're in Los Angeles, tell me with a straight face that you're not feeling this too. So yeah, they had redone the girls' bathroom. Again, that made 3 times this semester. Maybe for, if you counted the week, it smelled like cherry disinfectant and despair. This time it was teal, like aggressively teal. The kind of teal that's trying to convince you it's calm, while actually plotting your death. Everything was sleek and too clean. The stalls were metal now, polished, glossy, smooth like they'd been peeled from a spaceship. Even the trash cans were different, touchless, covered, modest. It was giving sanitized emotional crisis. I walked in and immediately stopped in the doorway. It wasn't just the color, it was the layout. There were 5 stalls now, not 4. And the third one, the one with the sticky door that used to wheeze like a dying animal, was gone. That stall had history, okay? Someone once scratched a full phone number into the door and wrote, "Hot for bio teachers only," under it in pink glitter pen. I found a used condom on the floor in their sophomore year and had an actual spiritual awakening. There were 3 tally marks inside the doorframe labeled blowies, and someone had sharpened a giant "Cry Here, Slut" above the toilet paper dispenser. Every time you flushed, it made a wheezing noise like a haunted saxophone. It was disgusting. It was ours. And now it was gone, wiped like it never happened. I blinked, then blinked again dramatically. "This place got a BBL or what?" I said, just loud enough to make the lip gloss girls at the mirror twitch. Angela was brushing her hair. Perfect part, glitter roots. Like nothing was weird. Like the room hadn't changed its bones overnight. "Are we not going to talk about the renovations?" I asked, leaning next to her, watching her face in the mirror instead of mine. She didn't stop brushing, just said, "You're not supposed to notice." Then she smiled like she hadn't just said the creepiest thing in the universe. Like it was normal. Like she was reading a BuzzFeed listicle about haunted stairwells and not living in one. I laughed it off, obviously. I wasn't about to be the girl who freaked out over bathroom tiles. I had a reputation. Unbothered but hot was a brand. Okay? Still, when I went into the last stall, I could feel it. The air was different, too quiet, like a silence that was trying not to breathe. I locked the door, sat down, and that was when I saw it. Someone had written "Do not cry" on the back of the stall in this insane, shifting color. It was like red if red had a panic attack. Not quite purple, not quite blood. My brain kept trying to name it and failed. I leaned closer. The letters rippled slightly, like they were sweating. They hadn't been there yesterday. I had been in this stall yesterday. I remembered the gum stuck under the toilet paper dispenser, the chipped tile with dried pink lip gloss smeared into the grout, the cigarette burned by the hook. Someone had stubbed one out on the plastic. Now, spotless, sterile, unreal. I flushed, washed my hands, didn't look at the mirror on the way out. The janitor was in the hallway again. Same mop, same blank face. I stepped out slow, swaying my hips just enough to make it obvious. I fixed my lip gloss in the reflection of the window, tossed him a lazy "fuck me." Looked like it was a dare or a curse, like if you're gonna watch, then watch, sweetie. His eyes followed me like he didn't have a choice. And just before I turned the corner, I heard something from inside the bathroom, like a voice, faint, muffled behind the tiles, crying. I kept walking, but I didn't put my headphones in, mostly because I wanted to see if anyone else had heard it. The crying. No one even looked up. I passed 3 girls giggling over a phone, someone vaping behind the trophy case, and a teacher who said "good morning" like it was still September. Everything was normal, except it wasn't, because I knew that sound, that ugly, hiccuping, snot-dripping type of crying, like a dying rat in eyeliner. So I turned around. Obviously, I wasn't gonna not check. I mean, what if it was interesting? I slipped back into the bathroom, and there she was, Lexi. Slutty little train wreck Lexi. Crop top barely covering anything. Bra strap twisted. Mascara halfway down her cheeks like war paint. She looked like a Bratz doll in a hurricane. She was hunched over the sink, clutching her phone like it owed her something, sobbing so hard it echoed. I stood there for a second, arms crossed. "You good?" I asked. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Then she turned, eyes red, lip gloss smeared, tits basically out. "Fuck you," she spat. "Leave me alone." And she stormed into the second stall. Didn't slam it, just shut it real soft, like she was trying not to fall apart too loud. I stood there another second, then scoffed, "Whatever," and left. She wanted to cry alone? Fine. Let her rot in seafoam and shame. On my way out, I tossed the janitor another look. Something between fuck me and fuck you. He stared, didn't blink. Loser. The next morning, I came to school feeling hot, like hair was still curled from yesterday hot, like I might bully someone by accident hot. You suffer for the look. That's the rule. Saw that bitch Marissa wearing my exact shade of gloss, but somehow looking like she licked a fryer. Saw Coach Valdez in cargo shorts again, literally why. Saw Ethan making out with that girl who always smells like popcorn. Tragic. Walked the hall like a runway. People looked. They always do. Then I passed Lexi's locker and froze because it was empty. Not messy. Not trashed. Not covered in glitter or bitchy Sharpie quotes like, "Suck it, Mr. K." Just gone. Like Lexi never leaned against that locker in her crop top, pretending to cry so people would ask what was wrong.
No juicy couture sticker. No empty perfume roller.
No scrunchie with blonde strands stuck in the elastic. No smell of vanilla vape and body spray war crimes. Just metal. Silent. Clean in a way that felt wrong. Like the hallway was lying. "She transferred," someone said behind me. Right. Sure. Because girls like Lexi totally just transfer in the middle of the week without posting about it, crying about it, or threatening to burn something on the way out. Bull. Shit. I told myself I just needed to check my makeup, even though it hadn't smudged, even though I was wearing setting spray, even though I knew exactly which stall I was walking back to. But when I got there, the bathroom was different again. I could tell before I even opened the door. But this time it wasn't just cleaner. It had an edge. The soft teal walls were gone, replaced with glossy black tile and chrome fixtures that looked stolen from a rap video set. The mirror had a heavy metal frame now. The lights above it buzzed harder, harsher, and on the stall door, graffiti. Real graffiti. Not the cute little "you wish you were me" scribbles girls used to Sharpie on the hand dryers. This was thick black spray paint, slashed across the metal like a warning. No tears in the system. Block letters. All caps. Still smelled fresh. The bathroom looked like it had been redesigned by someone angry. Someone who wanted to cover grief in bass lines and brick. But I could still feel it underneath. The sadness. The rot. Like the tile was just makeup over a bruise. I opened the second stall, Lexi's stall. Inside was spotless. Not just clean. Blank. Like no one had ever been in it. Like I hadn't stood outside that exact door yesterday while Lexi sobbed and told me to fuck off. Like the air itself didn't remember her. But I did. I started thinking. Not just in the way you scroll through old stories looking for drama. Not gossip thinking. Real thinking. Like my brain was catching up to something my bones already knew. And suddenly I saw them. Tiny Tina. Pink tile days. Always wore pink Converse. Split dye hair. Cat stickers on her locker. She had a girlfriend who cheated on her with a bio teacher's daughter. I found her in the first stall, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. 2 days later, not expelled, not dropped out, gone. Her locker emptied itself like a magic trick. Even the sticker residue was gone. Then there was June. Clove Girl. Renovation 2. Pale yellow. She was quiet goth, not hot goth. Shaved eyebrows. Always smelled like clove gum. Read tarot in the cafeteria and made boys nervous. I caught her crying into her hoodie sleeve. Didn't ask why. Didn't care. Next morning, locker reassignment. No announcement. No goodbye. And then, Lexi. Seafoam. Meltdown. Fuck you energy and mascara trails. I saw her cry. I saw her break. And now black tile. Chrome everything. A bathroom that looked like a wannabe rapper's wet dream. It was pretending to be cool, hard, but I knew. Every time someone really cried in here, cried like their chest was collapsing, they disappeared. The school didn't talk about it. The teachers didn't notice. The girls whispered for a day, then forgot. But the bathroom remembered, kept their echoes, and changed its face. New tiles, new smell, new lighting, like it was dressing up in different skins, trying to be anything but what it was, a grave. I backed away from the wall. My chest was tight. My hands were shaking. Nina, gone. June, vanished. Lexi, not even a rumor left. They all cried, here, in this bathroom, and then they vanished. The stall changed. The lights shifted. The school pretended it never happened. I shoved the stall door open and ran, out into the hall, my legs unsteady, my breath short, and there he was, mop boy, janitor, whatever he was, standing there like he'd never left. I stumbled toward him. You know, I said, you fucking know. He didn't move. What is going on with this bathroom? My voice cracked, too loud. Why do you guys keep changing it? He stared, silent. And the girls, what about the girls who cried? Where do they go? I felt my fists clench, tried to breathe. First it was Nina, then June, now Lexi, and no one says anything. You just repaint the stalls and act like they were never here. He looked me right in the eyes, like he was reading a countdown. You don't want to hear them, do you? What? I whispered. I felt my stomach drop. You don't want to hear them, like he was offering me an out, or a warning, like silence was safer. And then he turned away, back to his mop, like I didn't matter. I went back into the bathroom, because I had to, because part of me still didn't believe it. The lights above the mirror buzzed like bugs. The air was warm, still, wrong. I stepped in, closed the door behind me, and then the voices began. At first it was just a trickle, a soft sound under the pipes, but it rose, like floodwater. Please, get me out. I didn't mean it. Lexi, and more, so many more. I pressed my back to the stall door. The voices were behind the mirror, inside the walls, in the floor. June, Nina, girls I didn't even know, all crying, begging, and I couldn't move. I tried to hold it in, tried so hard, but my body was shaking, my throat clenched, and then I broke. I dropped to my knees, and I cried, real full gut-deep sobbing, tears hot on my cheeks, snot running, no control, no stopping. I didn't cry like a girl with an image. I cried like someone falling apart. And then it hit me. I had cried. Here, just like them. The final box checked. No going back. And the bathroom was listening. The air changed. Heavier. Hotter. Like it had been waiting for me to break. Like it could breathe now. And I collapsed. Fully. Palms against the tile. Forehead to the floor. My knees hurt. My ribs ached. But I couldn't stop. The sobs came from somewhere deep. Ugly sounds. No rhythm. Just noise and spit and shaking. I tried to grab the edge of the sink to stand up, but I missed. My hand hit the floor and just stayed there. I couldn't move. I didn't want to. Something in me was leaking out, and I didn't know if I could put it back in. Mascara stung my eyes. My gloss was gone. My hoodie was soaked. My face felt naked, and the voices kept whispering, so soft now, almost gentle, like they were welcoming me in. It's okay. You're one of us. We cried too. I shook my head. No, I said, but it came out broken, covered my mouth, and just sat there, alone, on the bathroom floor, where pretty girls disappeared. The whispers went quiet, like someone had turned them off. The air didn't get lighter. It got heavier, like something had settled, and I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw him. Shoes, old, beat-up black ones, scuffed at the toe, standing a few feet from me. the mop leaning beside him like a staff. I didn't look up right away. Couldn't. I was still on the floor, hands on cold tile, face flushed. I felt disgusting, exposed, but I could feel his stare on me, warm but not kind, tired, like he'd seen this before, maybe been this before. I finally lifted my head. He was just standing there, watching me, expression soft, like he was waiting for me to figure something out. "I don't want to disappear," I whispered, came out hoarse. I didn't know if I was saying it to him, or to the floor, or to whatever was behind the walls. But he heard, and he nodded, just once. Then he crouched, slow, set the mop down in front of me. The handle bumped my fingers, and he said, "You weren't supposed to understand. They don't like when someone understands." I stared at the mop, the worn grip, the frayed ends, the water dripping onto the tile. He looked at me like he wanted to say more, but didn't. He stood, walked to the door, didn't even look back, just said, "It has to be someone," and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, got dressed, did my hair, put on gloss I don't remember buying, went to school. The halls were cold, too quiet. People stared, not in a "you look hot" way, in a "who is that" way. Angela passed me without saying hi. Ethan didn't even glance up. I passed my old locker, glitter stickers, cracked mirror, Sharpie quote, "Cry here, then reapply." Now it's just silver, blank, like no one ever slammed it shut in heels, like I was never there. I kept walking, down the hall, toward the bathroom. My hands moved on their own. When I got there, I opened the door. The lights buzzed, the tile gleamed. There was a bucket, a mop, waiting. I started cleaning. Girls passed behind me, whispering. One of them asked, "Who is that?" Another shrugged.
No idea.
And I kept scrubbing, because that's what you do. You clean. You don't ask. You don't cry. "Hey!" The doormat crunched under my feet as I disengaged from my left suede loafer. "Still up for that trip to the mall?" My voice hung in the air, seemingly unwilling to venture through the apartment. "Hello?" I tried again, clearing my throat. "Matt!" The guttural creak of the bed springs gave him away. I made my way towards the bedroom. Matthew was no stranger to the occasional snooze, a respite from the weariness of his work-from-home routine. Phone in hand, he'd lounge against the bed frame in his linen drawstrings, contending with Reddit's banana counter, boxes of half-eaten Chinese tandoori strewn across my side of the bedspread. I stuck my head in, narrowing my eyes to assess whether the tandoori had made it onto the sateen sheets. But something about the way he sat perched on the edge of the bed, knuckling the mattress on either side of his torso, made me stop in my tracks. Strands of ash-brown hair lay slick against his perspiring temples, frantic eyes sweeping the carpeted interior as though for some overlooked evidence. A ripple of goosebumps coursed down my spine. "Maddie? What's the matter?" He swept his palm across the back of his neck, pursing his lips. Sprawling sweat stains marred the underarms of his charcoal Henley. "Nothing. Just a nightmare." His voice was barely a whisper, raspy and thick. "You're home early." "Yeah, I forced a sigh of relief, although my feet remained anchored to the doorway. "I hit my weekly coffee quota. Well, according to Niev anyway, so she let me off early." But Matthew's expression was impassive, like carved stone. I hesitated, attempting to curl my toes around the aluminum threshold. "Are you sure you're okay?" "What?" "Oh yeah, totally." Except he wouldn't meet my gaze. "Well, wanna go to the mall?" My husband's deadpan expression contorted into one of agitation. Actually, would you mind going on your own?" "I'm actually not actually, yeah, just go. My wallet's on the kitchen counter. Help yourself." "Yeah." I hesitated. Didn't you want to see the new Marvel movie, the one about the black window? He seemed too perturbed to correct me. Hello? Earth to Matthew? I snapped twice as though trying to reboot whatever mental software had malfunctioned. I only offered because you wanted to go. I have no business at the mall. He watched in silence as I crossed the room to my side of the bed and plopped down on it, absently picking at a fresh blister on my ankle. Honestly, whoever invented loafers, what are you doing? The alarm in his tone made my skin prickle. Yeah, I should probably slap a Band-Aid on it, eh? Can you believe I bought these shoes before Christmas last year? He said nothing, so I shifted my focus away from the scab and turned to face him. He was staring right at me, expression tight, like he'd already lived the conversation we were about to have. No, I mean, his voice suddenly gruff. What are you doing here? I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. He picked up on my apprehension. I mean, he swallowed, fingering the sateen geometric print, leaving dark sweat smears across the fabric. I mean, don't you want to do that? Well, in the bathroom? Like, in the shower, perhaps. Tucking a strand of rogue hair behind my left ear, I murmured, No, but you definitely need one. Geez, Matt, you reek. And look at the bed sheets. I only replaced them last night, and now they're all. I gestured with my hands, hoping they would somehow convey what words couldn't. Now that I'd had a chance to look around, the bedroom was a downright mess. Is it really that hard to not leave your dirty socks lying around? Sighing, I heaved myself off the bed to collect them, as I always did. And on the windowsill, next to the orchid, seriously? A beat of silence passed before Matthew finally spoke. Actually, those are yours. Found them in the bathroom this morning. He paused, then added with a shrug. Thought I'd, stow them away for you. Turning my back to him, I fingered the grubby white cotton. The socks were definitely too small for my husband's foot galore, but the blisters on my own were proof enough I hadn't been wearing any. My mother's classic, once a cheater, always a cheater, rang in my head. I shrugged it off. Not now. The circumstances under which we'd met were not important. After all, I was nothing like that bitch Janine. She used to knock back Actimels like they were tap water and flat out refused to wax her upper lip. A tragic combo. Really? On the windowsill? I attempted a snarky smile. Matt shrugged. Delivery guy rang. Must have set them down and forgotten about them. His phone lit up. He snatched it and swiped decline before I could glimpse the name. Just work. Henry, the new department head. Always on my case. His voice was steady, but his expression betrayed him wild, bewildered, as though his nightmare was creeping up on him again. Well, shouldn't you answer it? Sounds like it might be important. Later, he said, each syllable sharp-edged and final. It's lunchtime, isn't it? Look, Isla, you don't need to stay on my account. I'll nap a bit, get some work done. Really, go see Black Widow. I stared at him, silent and reproachful. Or, a new pair of shoes? Your feet look like they could use them. Actually, I clasped my hands together in a let's get things done kind of way. How about we clean up a little first? Can you toss your takeout in the trash? While I changed the sheets and cracked the window, the silence dragged a little too long. Matt's face twisted, agitation settling in like a second skin. No. He licked his chapped lips. No, look, I made this mess. I'll clean it. I rolled my eyes. Matt's definition of cleaning was shoving everything under the bed. That's why we got a bed with built-in storage in the first place. Anytime he attempted to change the sheets, it turned into a game of find the blanket. And I was always the loser, spending half the night freezing my butt off in the blanket-less gaps. Let's just clean it together, okay? You do the tandoori, I'll do the redash. Can you just fucking leave? His voice was sharp and venomous. I need some space, some time to think. I don't want to clean right now. I'll do it later, understand? I swallowed. Look, this is my home too. You can't just decide where I'm supposed to be whenever you need space. If you want alone time this much, maybe you should head to the mall and I'll stay here. Illustrating my point, I flopped back onto the bed, shoved the pillow against the headboard, and leaned into it. In fact, maybe I'll take a nap. For a moment, Matthew looked like he wanted to hit me. No, he looked as though I'd hit him. His fingers trembled, a thick vein bulging in his temple. With a few sharp, jerky movements, he sank onto his pillow, eyes fixated on the ceiling. I could see the frantic rise and fall of his chest beneath the blanket. "Maddie, what's the matter?" I tried once more, only to be met with silence. I was jolted awake to the weight of my husband's thick fingers digging into my shoulders. His flushed, sweat-slicked face loomed inches from mine. He'd already managed to maneuver both of my legs to his side of the bed, the square overhead lamp suddenly resembling a diamond from my skewed perspective. A gargled wailing filled my ears, bleeding into the walls, as if the room itself had begun to scream. "Stop crying!" he bellowed through my sleepy haze. Panic crashed through me, hollowing my chest like the wind had been knocked clean out of it. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I demanded, bolting upright. "Have you completely lost your mind?" A sheen of sweat clung to his upper lip, and thin, spidery capillaries threaded the whites of his eyes. Terror danced behind his staggered expression, loud and clumsy. He let go of my shoulders, his hands falling to his knees with a sharp, exasperated slap. "Where were you taking me?" My voice quivered, as though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. His breath caught, nostrils flaring as though he were about to cry. "Just out of the tandoori." I followed his gaze to the foot of the bed, where one of the takeaway boxes had somehow latched itself onto my foot, my left trouser leg now looking like it had taken a dive in tandoori sauce. Matt's gaze lingered on me, almost like he was daring me to believe him. "I don't know what's gotten into you today," I said, once the silence got too loud. "But I am done. I've had enough. I am going to clean this mess up and then dash." I glanced at my watch. 6:30. "Then I'll get dinner going." He slouched on the bed, silent, as if all the fight had been drained out of him. "God, it smells awful in here." I winced at the pungent mixture of tandoori sauce, sweat, and something else. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Let me just toss my pants in the wash." Momentarily, his eyes lit up as if I'd presented him with a long-coveted gift. As I made my way down the hallway of our apartment, I questioned whether I had only imagined it. Yes, obviously I'd imagined it. It was probably just the lighting, a trick of the eyes. I slid out of my tandoori-stained gray slacks and shoved them into the washing machine. I'd deal with them later. A dull thud came from the bedroom. Good, I thought. At least he was up. "Hey, how'd you fancy some lasagna for dinner?" I called, injecting a forced cheerfulness into my tone. "I think there's still some in the F-dash." As I turned into the bedroom, the sentence died in my throat. He stood motionless at the foot of the bed, pale, rigid, his face a picture of blank intensity. He wasn't blinking, and he didn't seem to be breathing either. A cold weight settled in my chest. "What's wrong?" No answer. Only the muted patter of the first drops of rain on the window. I swallowed. "Matt." I didn't like the way he was looking at me, like he wasn't seeing me at all, just staring through me. The room reeked, the smell wrapping around me like a wet cloth, as I doubled over against the door frame, heaving. "Can you get that damn tandoori out of here?" I pleaded. "Let's open the window." But Matthew didn't move, not a single breath, nor a curl of the toes. I could tell from his vacant expression that whatever I'd just said hadn't even registered. "Matthew," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "please work with me here. You're scaring me, and I don't know what to make of this." He swallowed, and then again, and a third time. "It was," he whispered, "it's only a nightmare. A nightmare." I held back an eye roll, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. Well, what was I meant to do? Call for an ambulance? Continue to stand there and watch him unravel? Another thought gnawed at my mind. Just how safe was I? Really? He didn't appear aggressive, but his demeanor flipped with no warning, and I'd certainly had my fill of surprises for one day. "Honey," I started, pattering across the carpet in my bare feet, making sure not to make any sudden movements. "Let me make you a cup of tea, okay?" Silence. I cleared my throat. "And then I will drive up to the mall, maybe meet up with a friend, so you can get some rest. How does that sound?" Feeling him flinch underneath his drenched shirt, I breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, strategic. I kept my hand steady on his elbow as we made our way to the kitchen. His statue-like manner had given way to a jitteriness that coursed through every inch of his body. "Sit down right here," I instructed, as though he were a toddler. "What kind of tea would you like?" "Peppermint," he managed after a pause. "W with 2 sugars." Obediently, I plopped a tea bag into his mug. "Hey, I need to get some new pants from the bedroom before I leave for the mall. Would you No. His tone was abrupt and no nonsense. "I'll go with you." Disbelief washed over me. One thing was crystal clear. He didn't want me going anywhere near that bedroom. "Okay," I said, gulping down my apprehension. "Then we'll go once you've finished your tea." That seemed to put him at ease, but I could feel his eyes burning a hole into my back as I brewed his drink. "Right," I said in my most matter-of-fact voice. "Nature calls. I'll be right back." His fingers clamped down on my wrist as I tried to brush past him. "No," he hissed. "Sit." So I sat. My heart was hammering behind my eyes with the threat of tears, but I held my own. My husband sat across from me, nursing his peppermint tea, his gaze never wavering. At this point, I knew without a shadow of a doubt there was something more than a mere nightmare at play. I could tell he was counting on me to head to the mall once he finished and would insist on chauffeuring me around the apartment until then. Was I in danger? No, couldn't be. Could I? His bloodshot eyes gleamed as if he'd read my thoughts. "Fuck this." I swallowed, praying the audible gulp wouldn't give away my distress. A reflex of self-preservation, I crossed my ankles and felt the scab on the bridge of my foot split open, releasing a warm trickle that slid between my toes. I buried the yelp before it surfaced, recalling last week's blister, larger, meaner, still clinging for dear life to my pinky toe. Now, if I could just... I scraped at it with the remnants of last month's pedicure, willing it to burst. "Are you all right?" Matthew was observing me through narrowed eyes. "Do you need to pee that bad?" I shook my head. "No." "Then what is it?" As the scab surrendered, I leaned down in my seat, feigning an absent-minded scratch at my ankle. I sniffed. "Aunt Irma's in." His incredulous gaze narrowed. "What?" I lifted my blood-stained palm and gestured downwards with my chin. "I'm on my period." Aghast, he watched as I stood up from the table, revealing fresh streaks of red across my calves and thighs. I held my breath, willing him not to notice how much more coated my feet were than my legs. "Jesus," he whispered, nostrils flaring in obvious disgust. "God, you didn't think to mention this?" I bit my lip. I said I needed to use the B-dash. "God, please just get it cleaned up. Now." I jumped at the opportunity before he could change his mind, wincing with every step as the open wounds on my feet throbbed their painful reminder. Heading straight for the bedroom, I attempted to piece together a mental to-do list for when I got there. What exactly was I hoping to do? Was I looking for something? So what? A bong? A bottle of pills? A fleshlight? Bursting into the bedroom and slamming the door shut behind me, I let out an involuntary retch as the overpowering stench hit me full force. It was even worse than a half hour ago. The odor of tandoori and sweat had vanished, replaced by something far more pungent. A heavy, putrid stench, resembling rotting sewage baked into the floorboards.
Isla,
Matt's distant voice emanated through the keyhole, urging me to twist the key and toss it across the room. Is everything okay? Any second now, he'd figure out I'm not in the bathroom and come looking. I had to move. Yeah, I bellowed. Just getting washed up. Okay, closet. I yanked it open, heart in my throat. Clothes, underwear, belts and purses, yada yada yada. No, wait, that was no way to look. Haphazardly, I began sweeping the clothes off of the shelves, letting them fall to the floor in a heap. Nothing. And the smell wasn't even coming from the closet, it was more centered. More. I crouched in front of the TV set, retrieving stacks of obsolete DVDs and tossing them carelessly into the growing pile of clutter in front of the closet. The bedroom looked as though it had been ripped through by a hurricane. God, what was I even looking for? The door handle jerked downward with a sudden jolt, making me flinch and then snap down again, as if refusing to believe it was locked.
Isla,
What are you doing? Open the door. A flicker of panic trilled in his voice. My breath caught in my throat. I am just getting changed. For the mall. Not bothering to get up, I crawled over to his nightstand, nearly ripping the dry fit drawer out with the seams. Condoms. Lube. Loose Maltesers with tiny hairs. Nothing. Open this door. Right now. My husband's voice suddenly seemed to tower above the room. My stomach in knots, I checked my own nightstand. Hand cream. Birth control. Loose Maltesers with tiny hairs. God, I'm coming. The smell was making my eyes water. I punched the curtains, yanking them from their holders. A flurry of dust bunnies erupted into the air, circling their way to the floor. Overcome with a sense of helplessness, I watched them descend towards my bloody feet. Enough! Matthew's voice thundered. His body slammed into the door panel with a deafening blow. Wait! Stop! I cried. You'll break the door! But Matthew seemed intent to do exactly that. With trembling hands, I scanned the room for anything that might help or make sense of what was happening. Heavy blows slammed against the wood, forcing the hinges to squeal in protest. It's your fault, he roared. You did this. A trail of cold sweat bloomed down my spine. He'd lost it. I couldn't risk it anymore. I had to get out. Now, I spun to face the window. Thank God we lived on the first floor. I could probably get away with minimal damage, a sprain, maybe a fracture at most. As I cracked it open, one of the white socks still sitting on the windowsill tumbled to the floor. Instinctively, I bent down to pick it up, but then caught sight of something I hadn't noticed before. The bottom right corner of the fitted sheet had come loose, draping limply across the mattress. I stared at it, suddenly oblivious to my husband's visceral yelling. This had never been an issue in the past, no matter how raunchy we got. In fact, the only way to really undo the elasticated corners was to. The center panel of the door came flying across the room, landing on top of a stack of DVDs. Through it, my husband glared at me like a rabid dog waiting to pounce. No axe for me, thankfully. Though it was a small mercy, he wasn't shouting, "Here's Johnny." "Isla, open the door, please. I'll explain everything." I heaved a sigh of relief as I realized the door key was buried under mounds of clothing, never to be seen again. I'm listening, but I wasn't really listening. My attention was fixed on the stubbornly erect corner of the fitted sheet. "Look, I don't know what you know exactly," his voice wavered. "But it was an accident. You just wouldn't leave and then you fell asleep and I gawked at him in silence, tracing the leather flap for the bed storage with clammy fingers. He must have noticed my apprehension. "Get away from the bed. Okay? Come here. Open the door. Nothing's happened." With one fell swoop, I yanked the leather flap on my side of the bed upwards, revealing the storage space beneath. The smell hit me tenfold as the compartment yawned open. Inside, clad in nothing but a pair of knee-high stockings, lay a young woman. She couldn't have been older than 25, Her wavy auburn hair fanned out like spilled blood across the linen sets. Her eyes were wide open, milky, and glazed over, trails of mascara creeping across her cheeks, all the way down to her earlobes. One of her hands contorted unnaturally behind her. The other was frozen mid-clutch around a cell phone, as if she tried to call for help she never received. A small black M was inked inside a heart on her translucent collarbone. I staggered backwards abruptly, my breath hitching in my chest. The foot of the storage compartment was flooded with fresh urine and liquid feces, seeping through the linen, its sharp ammonia sting making my head reel. I'd seen enough true crime documentaries to expect death's last crude signature, but never like this. I heaved as my husband watched through the broken door pane. He didn't need to explain. The truth hung thick in the air between us, permeating every room of the home we'd built, staining our sheets with shit and piss, scratching over our vows in cursive, tattoo parlor script. A slow, slithering dread whispered that this was on me. To come home too early. I'd said no to the mall. I'd insisted on that damn nap. Every choice I'd made had led here. Whatever this was on me. I told you it was just a nightmare, he murmured through the door, an edge to his voice. Now it's yours to live. I noticed it about a week ago, and I'm completely at my wit's end. I've been married to my partner for 7 years now. We met, fell in love, and wanted to start a family soon after. But somehow, my dream has turned into this nightmare these past few days. Charlie, my son, was born around 6 years ago, and I don't think I've ever felt this much love for anything in my life. The first time I held him was the day I swore I would do everything in the world to make his life the best it could be. And I don't want to brag, but I think my partner and I have done an absolutely fantastic job. We've never argued in front of him, never not shown him love or neglected him, or let him see the normal stress of adult life, even if our own went from bad to worse during the pandemic. What I want to say with that is that no matter what happened, Charlie knew that he would always come first for us. No nightmare was small enough to not wake us up. No scrape on his knee is not important enough to not make us check him thoroughly. No fever was low enough to not make us take notice. And we did all of that together. Family dinners, movies, even the playground. Only, since about a week ago, my child has changed, and I don't know what to do anymore. It started right after I had tucked him in and read him a bedtime story. "What is pain?" he asked me. I remember it so clearly, as the question caught me completely off guard. With no idea where it had come from, I felt a chill as I looked down at his almost angelic face and saw this strange twinkle in his eyes. That was the first time I felt like he had changed somehow. Of course, I didn't say anything but tried to answer his question as age-appropriately as possible, but my reply left him visibly unsatisfied. He was biting at his lips, something he had always done, but on that day, it too felt different. Less unsure, more aggressive. And all the while his eyes continued looking up at me, as I felt this strange chill in the atmosphere of the room. Of course, I told my wife, but she didn't seem to react at all. Well, I managed to talk myself down back then, and the next morning, when we went to the playground as a family, I reasoned that I must have just let my imagination get the better of me. I guess, if that was the truth, I wouldn't be writing everything down right now, though. It was at the playground when I got this strange feeling again. Charlie was running around like normal. I tried to tell myself at first, but soon these doubts crept up once more. I don't know. I watched him intently and he kind of seemed off, like his gait was different. The steps he took looked strange, like he tried to move legs that were far shorter than normal. Then there was the way he sometimes stopped with this wide and almost manic grin and looked at each of the children around him in turn. My wife didn't seem to notice, but I could feel it. Even if I didn't want to admit it to myself, somewhere inside I couldn't shake those suspicions. Charlie had changed? Or was it even my son at that point? A kid a bit younger than him was sitting on the swing, trying to gain some speed, and I could see the instant my son's eyes fell upon it. There was this change in his smile, this cruelty that only for a moment showed on his face. I was up on my feet before he reached the swing set, but my wife grabbed hold of my wrist as if to stop me. I didn't want to doubt her as well. Maybe she was just startled by my sudden movement, I told myself, but her hand held me back anyway. So I watched as Charlie approached the swing and suddenly grabbed it on the way down, making the girl sitting on there lose her balance and crash to the ground with a loud thud. The girl cried out, and I remember my son's grin, hidden from almost everyone as he looked down at her, then let go of the swing. My wife was over there in an instant while I couldn't move at all. Thankfully, nothing major had happened. The girl had scraped her forehead a bit, and Charlie was adamant that it had been an accident. But I know better. I saw him grab the swing and smile. We went home quickly after, with my wife almost babying our son, asking him if he had hurt himself over and over again. I could see it in his eyes, this strange and not even remotely childlike look he had. He was shaking his head at every question but kept staring at the hand he had used to stop the swing. I don't know. Maybe I'm interpreting too much into such a gesture, but I feel like I could see him wondering what else he could have done, and I get shivers even thinking about that. That night, my wife put him to bed, while I felt completely restless. I was walking around the kitchen, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Something had changed about my son. That much was obvious. Only I didn't know how much, at least not until a few nights ago. Back then, as I went upstairs and to our bedroom, long after she had put Charlie to bed, I suddenly stopped. I was maybe 3 steps away from the door to his room, but I thought I could hear him. He wasn't talking out loud or mumbling, but whispering, hissing in there. I felt a chill as I put my ear to the wall to hear him better, but all I could make out were those strange, high-pitched sounds. Of course, I didn't just leave him be, but opened his door, and the moment I did so, the whispers stopped. He was lying in bed, under his covers, pretending to be asleep. I know what my son sounds like when he sleeps, but this was not it. There isn't a single doubt about that in my mind. It felt like he was waiting for me to leave, and being tired, I did so after a few more seconds. The very next day, when my wife took our son to get a haircut, I snuck the old baby monitor into his room and hid it by his bed. I know what that sounds like, but I promise you, I am and was not crazy. If I hadn't found anything after that stunt, I was determined to get myself checked up at the hospital, but I did. That evening, I listened in on my wife and son when she put him to bed. Started off normal at first. She began to tell him a story, but after not even 2 minutes, he asked her to stop and simply talk with him. He sounded different, far too mature, and my wife's voice almost broke. They chatted about their day as if they were old friends instead of mother and son, but I could hear it every time my wife spoke. She sounded strained and on edge. It was only then that I realized that she knew as well. This strange, cold chill seemed to blow through the house as I continued to listen. They didn't talk about anything out of the norm, but the flow of their conversation just felt completely off. It was almost like Charlie was trying to learn how he should behave around normal humans. He asked her what the hairdresser's intention had been with a few of his questions. What the other people would have thought of his behavior. Stuff like that. Part of me wanted to run up there and confront him directly, but hearing my wife answering in this strangely demure tone made me stop and wait. She sounded scared, almost, so maybe it had gone on for longer than I thought. Soon after, my son told her to let him sleep, and I heard my wife walking out of the room and toward our bedroom a few seconds later. No goodnight kiss, no I love you. If I ever had any doubts, that alone would have told me all I needed to know. The problem was, I couldn't concentrate on that at all. As soon as my wife had left, the mumbling started. At first, it was almost incoherent, but after a few seconds, I could make out some fragments. It sounded like a prayer. This reverie in his voice made sweat break out all over my body. He wasn't speaking in English, no, nor any other language I know of. The words sounded older, rougher. What I can say for sure is that it wasn't gibberish. His mumbling prayer had a meaning. I could feel it. It flowed out of him in a continuous stream for a minute until suddenly he stopped. I was standing by the counter of the kitchen, staring down at the old baby monitor, then heard his voice, now sounding far too deep for a 6-year-old child. "Stop listening," he growled, then took a breath. "I do not like being spied on." The device in my hand started to blink wildly before smoke came out of its top, and it burst into flames. I wanted to run away, but I knew I couldn't. My wife was still upstairs, but that time, as I snuck up there and past my son's bedroom, I could hear him chuckling. Of course, I didn't dare open the door but ran past toward the room where my wife would be. My plan was to get her out of there, if it came to it, with force, but the moment I saw her and she saw me, all that bravado left me. She was sitting on the bed, crying silently as I walked in. There was fear in her eyes, real unadulterated terror and panic. I knew it at that moment. This thing had done something to her. So I sat down next to her and hugged her without saying a word for a long, long time. We fell asleep like that, I think because when I woke up, it was from something long and sharp cutting into my cheek. Next to my side of the bed, I saw Charlie standing and holding a kitchen knife while staring down at me like one would do at an insect. I wanted to scream for help, but he put one of his fingers over my lips, and I swear, my body seemed to freeze. Moving a muscle was out of the question, and the knife wandered down toward my throat. "What is fear?" Charlie whispered in this gruff voice but kept his finger on my lips. I looked over at my wife, whose eyes were wide as she stared back, unmoving just like me, trembling and sweating. I could do nothing but lie there and wait for what would happen next. This thing delighted in my terror, and I was sure it would cut me or stab me, but instead, it suddenly pulled the knife away and dropped it to the floor before turning and walking out of our bedroom as if nothing had happened at all. I tried talking to my wife, but she shook her head and held her hands over her ears the second I mentioned our son. Is he possessed? Was he always like that but stopped hiding it? Has something else taken his place? I don't know anymore. My wife won't talk to me about it. She smiles while she trembles from head to toe every time Charlie enters the room. This morning, we sat at the table, having breakfast in complete silence while he told us what he dreamed about. I don't know how long we're going to last. We can't run. My wife's eyes tell me as much. I can't call the police. This thing would simply play dumb. What else can I do? Please, just anything, or we might all be dead soon. It was past midnight when Chris and I left the old 24-hour diner at the edge of town. We had spent the evening catching up over burgers and coffee, talking about high school memories and future plans that would likely never materialize. As we strolled toward my car parked a little further down the block, Chris slowed his pace. I glanced over and noticed him rubbing his temples. He was pale. "Everything okay, man?" I asked half-jokingly. "Too much greasy diner food?" Chris shook his head, wincing as he leaned against a nearby lamppost. "No, it's different," he mumbled. "Everything's spinning." He grimaced, clutching his stomach as he swayed on his feet. I rushed over and grabbed him by the arm just as his legs gave out. His breathing was ragged, each breath shallow and strained. A jolt of panic shot through me. I wasn't sure what was happening, but it was more than just a bad burger. "Come on," I said, guiding him toward the car. "We need to get you to the hospital." We barely made it to the passenger seat before he collapsed completely. I managed to push him inside, buckling his seatbelt as his head lolled against the window. His breathing had grown faint, his skin cold. I didn't waste any more time. I jumped into the driver's seat and sped toward the hospital. The roads were empty, the entire town blanketed in a pale bluish light that made everything look strangely surreal. When the hospital finally came into view, I pulled up to the emergency entrance and skidded to a stop. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I half-dragged, half-carried Chris inside. The bright fluorescent lights inside the emergency room burned my eyes as I shouted for help. A nurse and a security guard rushed over immediately. Chris was placed on a gurney and whisked away into a triage room. I tried to follow, but the nurse held up a hand. "You need to stay in the waiting room, sir. Someone will come speak to you soon." Reluctantly, I turned back and made my way into the waiting room. It was a small, uninviting space lined with rows of faded plastic chairs. The harsh lighting overhead buzzed like a hive of angry bees, casting a cold, sterile glow over everything. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, with a hint of something stale, like old coffee or cheap hospital food. The reception desk sat at the far end of the room, cluttered with stacks of paperwork and a dusty computer monitor. Behind the desk, a tired-looking receptionist typed away with little enthusiasm, barely glancing up as I entered. She looked like she had been working the night shift for years, with deep shadows under her eyes and a weary slump in her posture. A glass partition separated her from the waiting area, with a small sliding window used to speak to patients. Aside from the receptionist, there were only a few other people scattered around the room. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled jacket sat slumped in a chair, staring blankly at the floor tiles, his face pale and drawn. Across from him, a young woman scrolled through her phone, her foot tapping rhythmically against the leg of the chair. In the far corner, an elderly woman with a hunched back knitted quietly, her lips moving as she murmured to herself, though I couldn't make out the words. The wall-mounted TV flickered above, showing a muted news broadcast with closed captions scrolling across the screen. Next to it, a clock ticked irregularly, the second hand jerking with each movement as though struggling to keep time. The room itself seemed caught in some liminal state. I chose a seat near the corner, trying to calm my breathing. My heart was still racing from the rush to the hospital. The seat beneath me was stiff and uncomfortable, offering little relief from the tension gripping my body. I shifted, trying to find a better position, when I felt something crinkle under my leg. Frowning, I reached down and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that had been wedged into the chair. It was old and yellowed at the edges, like it had been left there for a while. Curious, I unfolded the paper and smoothed it out on my lap. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, as if whoever wrote it had been in a hurry or panicked. The list was numbered, and as I began to read, I couldn't help but feel a mix of surprise and amusement at what was written there. Rule 1. Avoid making eye contact with the receptionist between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. I raised an eyebrow. That seemed oddly specific. Why would anyone write something like that? I glanced over at the receptionist, who was still tapping away at her keyboard, oblivious to the rest of the room. Was this some kind of prank? The idea made me smirk a little, despite the heaviness in the air. Rule 2. Never walk past the reception desk without greeting the receptionist after 2:30 a.m. I let out a short, dry laugh. So I'm supposed to be polite now? I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. It was all so ridiculous. Maybe someone had written this as a joke to mess with the people stuck here at odd hours, bored out of their minds. I could imagine some bored night shifter scribbling out these rules as a way to pass the time. Rule 3. If a visitor arrives asking for directions, do not help them. I paused. That one was strange. It carried a different weight compared to the others. Who wouldn't help someone lost in a hospital of all places? Rule 4. If you hear your friend's voice calling from down the hallway, do not leave the waiting room to look for them. The amusement drained from my expression. I felt a chill run up my spine, as if the temperature in the room had just dropped a few degrees. I glanced toward the dimly lit hallway that led to the ER rooms. It seemed to stretch into darkness. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. This list was just some random nonsense, wasn't it? I continued reading, my curiosity now tinged with unease. Rule 5. If a power outage occurs, stay seated and do not move. Rule 6. If a door that should be locked is found open, close it immediately and do not look inside. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I couldn't explain why, but each rule seemed to grow darker, more foreboding as I read on. It wasn't just the content of the rules, it was the way they were written, as if someone were trying to warn me. Rule 7. Do not look through the glass doors leading to the courtyard after 4 a.m. Rule 8. If you feel a sudden chill, do not look over your shoulder. That one made me swallow hard. There was something inherently unsettling about the thought of a chill creeping up on you from behind and not being able to turn around to see what or who might be there. I couldn't help but glance behind me, but there was nothing there. Just the same sterile room with its faded chairs and buzzing lights. I reached the last rule, and for some reason my heart beat a little faster. Rule 9. If a security guard tells you it's time to leave, check the clock before listening. It's safe to leave after 6 a.m. My gaze flicked up to the wall-mounted clock, its second hand twitching with every tick. It read 1:30 a.m. At the bottom of the paper, written in shaky red ink, were the words, "Trust me." I learned the hard way. There was a dark, crusted stain on the corner, one that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The sight of it made my stomach twist. I rubbed my fingers over the words, feeling the rough texture of the ink beneath my skin. I couldn't help but let out a short, nervous laugh. What kind of place is this? I whispered to myself. I slumped back in the chair. It was hard to shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, but I forced myself to dismiss it as a weird prank. The list couldn't actually mean anything, just someone's twisted idea of a joke. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes, trying to calm my thoughts. A part of me couldn't stop thinking about Chris and the way he had collapsed in the parking lot. The quiet hum of the waiting room wrapped itself around me, making the place feel even more isolating. That's when I heard it. My name, spoken in a low, barely audible voice that seemed to drift down the hallway. Adam, Adam. My eyes shot open and my body tensed. The voice was unmistakable. It was Chris. I jerked my head towards the corridor leading to the ER rooms, but there was no one in sight, just the pale overhead lights flickering. The voice came again, a little louder this time. Adam, help me. I jumped up from the chair, the sound of my name sending shivers down my spine. My feet were already moving before I realized it. I took a few steps into the hallway. I glanced back at the waiting area, now a few steps behind me. The other visitors, still scattered about, seemed completely unaware, oblivious to the voice echoing down the hall. Adam. Chris's voice was more desperate now, laced with pain. I took another step down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the floor. As I walked deeper into the corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder, some of them flickering out completely, leaving long stretches of darkness. The ER rooms lined the sides of the hallway, their doors slightly ajar. I hesitated as I reached one of the open doorways. I peered inside and immediately wished I hadn't. There, standing in the center of the dimly lit room, was a man in a patient's gown, facing me. The man's head moved in quick, jerking motions, shaking from side to side so rapidly that I couldn't make out any details. It was just a blur, a sickening blur. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and I stumbled back in shock. My breathing grew shallow as I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen, but there was no time to process it. Chris's voice came again, further down the hallway. Adam, please. I pushed forward, forcing myself to continue. The unsettling darkness around me seemed to press in from all sides. I came across another room, the door half open. Inside, I could see a doctor standing over a patient, his back hunched as he examined something on the table. The doctor wore a white lab coat and surgical mask, his features obscured. But there was something off about the way he moved. His motions were robotic. Then I noticed the tool in his hand, a bone saw. He raised it slowly, the harsh metal glinting under the dim light, and then I heard a gut-wrenching scream from the patient on the table. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall behind me, my eyes wide with terror. When I looked back into the room, it was empty. There was no doctor, no patient, just a dark, vacant space. My hands trembled as I rubbed my face, trying to snap out of whatever hallucination I was trapped in. This can't be real, I whispered to myself, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of me, and Chris's voice continued to call out, drawing me further in. As I turned the next corner, I froze. There, hanging in the doorway of a nearby room, was a mass of dark hair, long and tangled, spilling down from just beyond the doorframe. It looked like someone was standing behind the door, peeking around the corner. A single eye, black as pitch, stared directly at me from the darkness. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The figure remained there, still and silent, just watching me. I took a slow step forward, and then the eye pulled back into the shadows, disappearing from view. The hallway was deathly quiet, save for the low hum of the lights. I forced myself to move past the doorway, my pulse hammering in my ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the figure again, just around the corner of the room, her head unnaturally high, as if she were crouched against the ceiling. I could see more of her this time, her elongated arms stretched out, the bony hand reaching towards me. Before I could react, the hand brushed my shoulder, cold and corpse stiff. Its fingers scratched into my skin like claws. I bolted, my shoes squeaking on the linoleum as I raced down the hallway. I had no idea where I was going. I just wanted to get away from whatever that thing was. I threw open the first door I saw and stumbled back into the waiting room. My heart pounded in my chest as I staggered to a stop. Everything appeared normal again, the reception desk, the plastic chairs, the other visitors who hadn't moved an inch. It was as if none of it had happened. But my skin prickled with the lingering touch of that hand. Glancing at my shoulder, I noticed 3 faded scratch marks, a reminder that something was very, very wrong. I slumped back into a chair, catching my breath, trying to make sense of the nightmare I had just experienced. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled list of rules, my hands trembling as I unfolded it. I glanced at Rule 4 again, the words seeming to taunt me. If you hear your friend's voice calling from down the hallway, do not leave the waiting room to look for them. I had ignored it, and now I was starting to believe that those rules weren't a joke after all. I tried to calm myself, my breathing coming in short, ragged gasps as I leaned back in the chair. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to force myself to think rationally. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived, or maybe the stress of seeing Chris collapse was catching up to me. I told myself that I had only imagined the things I saw in the hallway. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the feeling of that cold hand brushing against my skin lingered. I glanced at the clock. 1:45 a.m. The minutes seemed to crawl by. I couldn't shake the dread that had settled in my chest. My thoughts drifted back to the list of rules. Each one seemed ridiculous on its own, but after my experience in the hallway, I found myself paying closer attention to each word. That was when I noticed him, a man who hadn't been in the room before. He stood near the entrance, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his long coat, his eyes scanning the waiting room like he was searching for someone. His presence sent a jolt of unease through me. I was sure he hadn't been there earlier. I would have remembered his tall, lanky figure and the unsettling way his gaze seemed to linger on the other visitors, one by one. The list. I pulled it from my pocket and read the 3rd rule again. If a visitor arrives asking for directions, do not help them. The man's gaze found me, and he started walking toward where I sat. My body stiffened, every muscle tensing involuntarily. There was no mistaking his intention. He stopped a few feet away, leaning slightly forward, as though inspecting me. "Excuse me," he said in a voice that was calm, but too deliberate. "Could you help me find the ICU? I seem to be a little lost." The tone of his voice was polite enough, but there was something off about it, something that put me on edge. It was as though he was trying to mimic normal speech but wasn't quite getting it right. I glanced around the waiting room, but no one else seemed to notice the man's presence. The receptionist didn't even look up. I shook my head, gripping the list tighter in my hand. "I'm sorry. I can't help you," I stammered. The man didn't move. He just kept staring at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice growing softer, almost coaxing. "It won't take but a moment. It's just down the hall, right?" I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt guilty for not helping him, but the words on the list kept flashing in my mind. "Do not help them." I forced myself to look away, hoping he would take the hint and leave. But instead, he took a step closer. "It's not very kind to ignore someone who needs help," he said, his tone now edged with something darker. I glanced at his face, and for a split second, his features seemed to shift. His mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, the kind that didn't belong on a human face. The corners of his lips seemed to extend too far, the teeth behind them slightly jagged. I shot up from my chair, stumbling backward. The man's smile didn't waver as he turned his head slightly, like he was examining me from a different angle. Then he turned towards the reception desk and started walking, slowly and unnatural. At one point, his head snapped towards me, unnaturally, the same grin on his face, as he continued walking. I froze. I couldn't look away. Then, as he reached the reception desk, he just passed through it and then he suddenly disappeared. My gaze darted around the waiting room. The other visitors were still exactly where they had been moments ago, their expressions unchanged, their movements as mechanical as before. I glanced back at the receptionist. She was still at her desk, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the computer screen. My gaze flickered up to the clock on the wall. It was 1:58 a.m., and Rule 1 flashed in my mind. Avoid making eye contact with the receptionist between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. After a few minutes, I glanced toward her, my eyes drifting out of habit. It was just for a second. The receptionist was staring straight at me, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. She wasn't moving. It was as if she'd been waiting for this moment. I tore my gaze away, my pulse quickening. As I turned my head, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her get up from her chair, her movements oddly stiff, as though her joints didn't bend the right way. She walked forward, but not around the reception desk. She passed through it, like it wasn't even there. I froze, not daring to look directly at her again. I squeezed my eyes shut. I felt the air grow colder, the chill pressing against my skin. Felt as if she were getting closer. I could hear the faintest rustle of fabric, the light creak of footsteps on the floor, growing louder with each passing second. "Don't look. Just don't look," I told myself, my hands gripping the edges of the chair. I sat there, tense and unmoving, my eyes squeezed shut as if I could will her away by sheer force of will. Then, everything went still. The room fell into an unnatural quiet, the buzz of the fluorescent lights the only sound left to ground me in reality. I opened my eyes slowly, half expecting to see her standing inches away from me, her face contorted into something inhuman. But the receptionist was back at her desk, looking down at the monitor, her posture as unbothered as if she hadn't moved at all. The other people in the waiting room seemed unchanged, as though nothing unusual had happened. I glanced at the clock. 2:40 a.m. A wave of relief washed over me, my shoulders sagging as the tension finally started to leave my body. I forced myself to my feet, my legs still shaky beneath me. I couldn't just sit there, feeling like a trapped animal. I needed to move to clear my head. As I got up to walk around the room, I remembered Rule 2. Never walk past the reception desk without greeting the receptionist after 2:30 a.m. I wasn't about to take any more chances. I turned toward the receptionist and gave her a nod, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi," I mumbled awkwardly. She didn't look up, didn't react at all, just continued to type away on the keyboard. I took that as a good sign and began walking a slow circle around the waiting room, forcing myself to stay calm, to pretend that everything was normal. The chill in the air hadn't entirely left. As I walked, I could feel a subtle shift in the temperature, a lingering cold that seemed to follow me. The overhead lights flickered faintly, casting brief shadows along the walls, giving the impression that the room was expanding and contracting with each pulse. As I rounded the corner, I felt the presence behind me, something that wasn't there before. I didn't hear footsteps, but I sensed it nonetheless, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. It was close, just out of reach. My instinct was to turn and look, to confront whatever was creeping up behind me, but I clenched my jaw and kept my gaze forward, remembering Rule 8. If you feel a sudden chill, do not look over your shoulder. I walked faster, my pulse quickening as the chill seemed to grow stronger with every step. The lights buzzed louder, the flickering more erratic. I felt something brush against the back of my neck, cold and light, like a breath. I didn't stop until I reached the chairs again, sinking into one with a shuddering breath. The presence faded, though the air remained icy, and I rubbed my hands together to warm them. I glanced back toward the reception desk, half expecting to see the receptionist watching me again. But she remained focused on her monitor, her face lit by the soft glow of the screen. I leaned back in the chair, my heart still racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the rules on that crumpled piece of paper weren't just random scribbles left behind to scare people. Whatever game I'd found myself in, it wasn't a joke. And now, the only way out seemed to be playing along. I sat there for a long moment, my body trembling, trying to calm my nerves and slow my breathing. That's when I heard the automatic doors slide open with a soft hiss. I looked up, expecting to see another late-night visitor or a nurse making rounds. But my heart almost stopped when I saw who stepped inside. It was Chris. He looked perfectly fine, normal. His face had color, his clothes were clean. There wasn't a single sign that anything had been wrong with him. Relief rushed through me, and I felt the tension in my muscles finally ease. Chris's eyes found mine, and he broke into a small smile as he walked over. "Hey, Adam," he said casually, his voice the same as always. "They let me out early." The relief was so overwhelming that I laughed out loud. "Chris, man, you scared the hell out of me," I said, shaking my head. "Are you sure you're okay? You looked pretty bad earlier." He shrugged, giving a dismissive wave of his hand as he settled into the chair next to me. "Yeah, I'm fine now. Whatever it was, I guess it passed. They ran a few tests and said there was nothing serious." He flashed that familiar grin, the one I'd seen 1,000 times. "Guess I'm just too stubborn to stay sick." As we talked, something in the back of my mind itched. There was an unsettling quality to the conversation, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Chris was acting normal, too normal. He was speaking in a calm, deliberate tone, his words perfectly measured. I brushed it off, figuring it was just my nerves playing tricks on me after everything that had happened tonight. Still, as Chris continued to talk, a strange sense of déjà vu settled over me. It was as if the conversation was looping back on itself, repeating the same phrases. His voice had the same rhythm, the same inflection, almost like a recording on a loop. Suddenly, I turned to see a nurse walking briskly down the hallway, pushing a gurney. My stomach dropped when I saw who was lying on it. Chris. He was unconscious, hooked up to a heart monitor, an oxygen mask over his face. My gaze darted back to the seat next to me, but the chair was empty. The Chris who had been sitting beside me was gone, vanished as though he'd never been there at all. My skin prickled as a wave of cold panic spread through me. I stared at the empty chair for a long moment, my heart pounding in my ears. Then, I saw the nurse walking by the waiting room. She glanced over at me briefly, her expression neutral. I jumped up from my chair. "Wait!" I called after her. "Is Chris okay? My friend, he was just sitting here. What's going on?" The nurse slowed, turning to look at me with a small, tight-lipped smile. "Your friend is stable," she said, "but he hasn't woken up yet." Her words hung in the air, leaving me cold and confused. I glanced back at the empty seat, then at the nurse as she continued down the ER hallway. My head was spinning. Had Chris really been here, or had I just imagined him? I sank back into my chair, my body heavy with fatigue and fear. I glanced at the clock again. 3 a.m. Time was moving, but not in the way it should have. I felt trapped, as though the minutes were pulling me further into the unknown. I pulled the crumpled list of rules from my pocket and unfolded it with trembling hands, my eyes scanning the lines again, looking for answers that weren't there. I needed to understand what was happening to me, what was happening in this place. But the rules only deepened the mystery, the words twisting in my mind like a riddle I couldn't solve. Time seemed to move strangely now. I couldn't tell how long I had been sitting in that chair, how long I had been wandering the room. The clock above seemed to skip minutes or stall entirely, and my sense of reality continued to blur. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue that clung to me like a shroud. I glanced at the clock again. It showed 5:55 a.m. Almost there, I thought. Almost free. That was when a security guard appeared in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the waiting room floor. He was a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a calm, almost reassuring presence. He walked toward me with an easy stride and stopped just a few feet away. "Sir, it's time to leave," he said in a deep, measured voice. "The ER is closing for non-patient visitors." I blinked, my thoughts catching up slowly. "But my friend Chris is still." Just then, I saw Chris walking out of the ER hallway. He waved to me, a tired but genuine smile on his face. Relief flooded through me, and I started to get up, then hesitated, the words from Rule 9 echoing in my head. If a security guard tells you it's time to leave, check the clock before listening. I turned my gaze toward the clock above the reception desk. 6:01 a.m. My shoulders sagged in relief. I was finally free of this place. I nodded and followed the security guard toward the exit, Chris walking beside me. As we stepped out into the cool morning air, I felt like I could finally breathe again. We got into my car, and I started the engine. I felt a small smile tug at my lips. I pulled out of the hospital parking lot, the tension in my chest slowly beginning to fade. But as I drove, a strange unease crept over me. The world outside the car windows seemed darker than it should have been. I glanced at the sky. It was still a deep, inky black, with no trace of the early morning light. It was too dark, too quiet. I squinted, peering between the trees lining the road, and my heart skipped a beat. In the shadows, I saw faint figures standing there, their forms barely visible, distorted as if they were made of mist. Panic surged through me. I glanced at the dashboard clock, and my stomach dropped. For 30 a.m. How was that possible? It had been well past 6 a.m. when we left the hospital. I turned to look at Chris in the passenger seat, my heart pounding in my ears. But it wasn't Chris. There was a shadow there, sitting beside me. Its form was a vague silhouette, its face obscured, but I could feel it watching me, feel its eyes boring into my skin. I gasped, my grip on the steering wheel tightening as my vision blurred with fear. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt in the middle of the road. Suddenly, I was back in the waiting room, seated in the same stiff plastic chair. The security guard stood in front of me, a grin spreading slowly across his face, his eyes unnaturally wide and gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. "Time to leave," he said again, his voice echoing in my head like a taunt. I felt my mind start to unravel. Had I ever left the hospital at all? Was I trapped here, destined to relive these twisted events over and over again? I buried my face in my hands, my breathing ragged as a sense of hopelessness washed over me. Felt like hours passed, but it could have been minutes or even seconds. I didn't know anymore. I was dimly aware of a nurse standing in front of me, her voice calm and soothing, pulling me back from the edge. "Sir, your friend is stable," she said gently. "He's going to be okay, but he needs rest. He'll be transferred to a hospital room soon, and you can visit him during regular visiting hours." I looked up at her, my vision clearing slowly. The waiting room was just as it had been. No sign of the security guard or anything out of the ordinary. I glanced at the clock. It read 6:30 a.m., and a soft glow of morning sunlight filtered through the glass doors, filling the room with a warm light. The nightmare was over. I nodded to the nurse, murmuring my thanks, and stumbled out of the ER, the cool morning air a welcome relief. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the hospital, half expecting to see something out of place. But it looked like any other hospital in the early light, mundane and unthreatening. I got in the car and drove home, the sun finally rising to chase away the last remnants of darkness. Later that day, I returned to the hospital to visit Chris. He was awake, sitting up in bed and looking surprisingly well for someone who had collapsed so suddenly the night before. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I pulled a chair up to his bedside. "How are you feeling?" Chris chuckled weakly. "Better than I should, I guess," he replied. "But I had the weirdest dreams last night. It was like I was half conscious the whole time." My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of dreams?" Chris frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to recall. "One of them was, I came in the ER and saw you sitting in the waiting room. You looked pretty freaked out. And then there was another one. We were leaving the hospital together, just driving away into the night. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, weird," I said quietly, my mind racing with the memory of the night's events. As we sat there talking, I glanced at my shoulder, where a constant pain kept tugging at me, and saw the 3 scratch marks from last night. I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, out there in the darkness of the night I had just escaped, something was still waiting, and the rules of this place would not be so easily forgotten. We stepped ashore on the southern port of the island. There was an old sign nailed to a wooden beam. "Welcome to Fair Oak Island," it said. Our original plan had been to take a few days off at a writer's retreat on Arholma Island in the northern parts of the Stockholm archipelago, but our taxi boat, the only one willing to defy the ice floes still resting on the dark water, had gotten lost in an unexpected fog and instead delivered us to this island. Not even our captain, who claimed to know every little islet on the chart, seemed to know where we had ended up. He did reek of alcohol, though, so at this point I just assumed he didn't know what he was talking about. Tom began walking through the snow with resolute steps. "Let's look around," he said. "It might take hours until the fog dissipates. We should try and get the most out of this little mishap. It might serve as inspiration for our next stories." Felix, who didn't seem as happy about the situation, tried to get a signal by holding his phone up to the sky. "I'm not sure it works that way," I said and checked my own phone. "I don't have any signal either. Are we really that far away from the nearest cell phone tower?" "I've never seen so much snow in my entire life," Mindy said as she held on to Felix's arm. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined." In an instant, hundreds of crows escaped the trees in front of us. They cawed as they flew over our heads. Jorgen, still standing next to his boat, looked at them with concern in his eyes. Next, a loud sound coming from deep inside the island reached us. It sounded like someone was banging huge sheets of metal against each other. It was repeated a few times with regular intervals until it quieted down again. "What was that?" Felix asked. I repeated the question to Jorgen, but in Swedish. "No idea," he said, itching his beard. "I don't like this place. This island shouldn't be here. Surely I would have heard about it. You know what I think?" "What?" I asked. "It's owned by the Navy and consciously kept of the charts. This must be where they have their secret base. I've heard about it. They're trying out secret weapons. Maybe something biological. Anything to keep the Russians away. We should probably get out of here as soon as possible. They might not let us leave if they catch us." Jorgen was clearly a man of tall tales, but the way he spoke, the genuine fear in his voice, still made the hair stand up in my neck. "The mystery thickens," Tom said after I translated the story, "and we just stepped ashore. I can't wait to see what more this island has in store for us." "Sounds like a cock and bull story to me," Felix said and smiled confidently. "You guys have spent too much time on Nasleep. It's starting to get to you." "Ah," Tom said. "Where's your spirit of adventure?" "Yeah," Mindy said with a grin on her face. "You need to keep an open mind." "I'll tell you this," Felix said. "Right about now, I'm incredibly open to finding somewhere to get warm. I might never have seen this much snow before, seeing that I'm from Australia and all, but I have never felt this cold either." "I'm staying at the boat," Jorgen said. "If you aren't back before sunset, I'm leaving." All of us felt confident we wouldn't be gone that long and walked up what looked to have been a road before it was covered in a thick layer of snow. After walking for about 10 minutes, we were greeted by yet another sign. This one said, "Clara's Garden." A few meters further ahead, a couple of typical Swedish cottages appeared. They were painted in a bright crimson red with white trimmings on the windows. As expected, there was a garden at the center of the cottages. It was frozen in place just as if was made purely out of ice crystals. The lights were on inside the main building, and there were fresh footprints all over the place. The unease I had felt after listening to Jorgen vanished as soon as I learned that there were people living here. It comforted me that we weren't all alone here, and that there was somewhere we could warm ourselves while we waited. "What are those?" Felix asked and pointed to a couple of vehicles parked outside. "Snowmobiles," I said. "They're common in Sweden during winter. I would be surprised if the island is big enough for cars. So this might be their only mode of transportation if they want to get somewhere fast." Tom stepped forward. "Let's get inside and say hello," he said. "I'm eager to hear what they have to say about this place." Inside, the walls were painted white, but over time they had turned a bit gray, and there was a couple of bells on a red string that rang as we opened the doors. A few tables were placed haphazardly in front of a reception, not unlike a cafe, and the dry air smelled of a mixture of tar and wood. There was a couple of teenagers sitting at one of the tables. They looked at us like they hadn't seen an outsider in years. They were all dressed in what looked like vintage clothes from the 80s. I didn't pay much attention to it. It wasn't unusual for islanders this far out in the archipelago to be a bit behind on things. We heard steps coming down a stairwell behind the reception. A middle-aged woman soon appeared. She smiled at us as she positioned herself behind the desk. I told her how we ended up on the island and asked her if it was okay for us to wait here until the fog dissipated. "That fog won't go away until at least tomorrow," the woman said. "You're welcome to use our cottages for free if it's just for the night. We only rent them out during summer, so it shouldn't be a problem." She smiled. "But there won't be any room service." I turned to my friends and told them what was up. They were surprisingly happy to hear it. Even Felix brightened up a little bit, and we agreed to the woman's offer. She gave us 2 keys, one for me and Tom and one for Felix and his girlfriend. "Can you tell me something about this island?" I asked the woman. "What does Farouk mean, for example? I haven't heard that word before." "No one knows," she said. "It's simply what it says on the runestone on Little Island. That's what we call the smaller island in the lake further up. Clara was my great-grandmother. Back when she was still alive, she used to tell me so many stories about her childhood on this island. Not all of them were meant for little kids. Of course," she said with a quirky smile. "Those were the ones I loved the most." "What's your name?" I asked.
Clara.
"Just not that Clara. I would love to hear some of those stories, Clara," I said and added. "Someone should tell the guy with the boat, Jorgen, that we'll spend the night here. He's waiting for us at the port. He didn't want to come with us." No worries, Clara said. Ake will go down there and tell him. The bells rang. A tall man with a gray complexion and a rather dull countenance stepped inside together with a little girl. Contrary to the man, the girl was full of life. She ran inside, jumping up and down just as if her heavy winter clothes didn't weight her down the slightest. Maria, Clara said, have you been throwing snowballs at Ake again? The tall man, seemingly absent-minded, turned toward the woman. I need to go back out there, he said. There's something. I saw something. Tom introduced himself to the man, startled him, and while they spoke, seemingly without issues, I turned to the woman and took the keys from the desk. I noticed a newspaper behind Clara. Olof Palme was on the cover, Prime Minister of Sweden from 1969 to 1976 and 1982 to 1986. I pointed at it and said, "That must be really old," I said. "I was just 1 year old the day he was murdered." Clara looked surprised, almost shocked. "What a strange thing to say," she said. "That's no joking matter." I told her I was sorry. Some people loved Palme, some hated him. I should have known better than to comment on it, I thought, even this long after his assassination. I gave Felix his key, and he left for the cottage with his girlfriend. "What did that man say?" I asked after Tom had finished talking to him. "Dude," Tom said. "He was super weird. He insisted that he had met me earlier. I have no idea what he was talking about. He's apparently been trying to find what's making that sound we heard, and he said he saw me coming out of the woods." "That's crazy," I said. "Maybe his English wasn't that good? Perhaps he—" "Nah, I think that's exactly what he meant," Tom said. "Creeped me out." The inside of the cottage seemed to have been newly renovated, but it still looked like it belonged in the past. The IKEA furniture had a pristine quality, but it was all older models. After picking our beds and putting our bags next to them, I tried to text Felix to see how he was doing and if he and his girlfriend would like to watch a movie with us later, but there was still no reception. I turned on the TV, half expecting it not to work since it looked so old, and at the same time Tom came out of the bathroom, seemingly upset. "There's black mold in there," he said. "It's coming out of the tap like it's growing inside the pipes. I don't think we should drink any of the water. It's disgusting. Have you been able to get a signal?" I asked. "It's strange that there's no coverage here. I've been pretty far out in the archipelago before, and I've never had any issues with getting a signal." "I haven't checked," he said. "But seriously, that mold though." He put on his jacket again. "I'm going to ask someone to come take a look." "Okay," I said. "You sure it can't wait until tomorrow? I mean, it's just—" "No way, man. How are we supposed to brush our teeth?" I nodded and directed my eyes to the TV. It only showed stuff from the 80s. At this point, a feeling of unease came over me. It started to dawn on me that something was off about this place, but I didn't dare to guess what exactly that something might be. After the sun had set, I got up from the sofa and looked out the front door to try and get a hold of Tom. I had assumed he had stayed at the main building to talk to Clara. It was typical of him to be overly social with strangers, but when I looked outside, I saw that all the lights were off inside the main building. "Tom!" I yelled. "You there?" No response. He was nowhere to be seen. I put on my shoes, ready to go looking for him, when Felix came out of the forest behind his cottage in what looked like a state of panic. "Hey," he said. "Have you seen Mindy?" "No," I said. "Where have you been?" No time to explain. He was tearing up. "I have to find her." He ran toward the snowmobiles. "Hey," I said. "What's going on? Have you seen Tom?" It was all so confusing. Felix started the engine and zigzagged his way into the forest with the headlights blaring in front of him. Clara came outside the main building, wondering what was going on. I ran up to her. She demanded to know who took the snowmobile. I told her something had happened to Felix's girlfriend and that he had gone looking for her. I then proceeded to ask her if she had seen Tom, but she didn't seem to remember him. It's too cold to go into the forest alone at this hour. Don't you know anything? She said. I'll call Ulf. Just wait here. He and the twins know their way around the island. Ulf arrived on his own snowmobile together with his two friends. One girl that sat behind him and another girl on her own vehicle. It was the teenagers we had seen inside earlier. I told them what had happened and that all my friends had suddenly gone missing. It's not like them to act like this, I said. I have no idea what's going on, and I got no signal on my phone. Do you have a phone that works? I asked. My phone works fine, Ulf said, but my house is on the other side of the... I mean your cell phone, I interrupted. Do you have a working cell phone? They all looked at me as if I were insane. My God, I exclaimed. What year is this? You don't have cell phones? I showed them my phone. Look, no signal. They looked at the display as if they were witnessing a miracle. Wow, the girl behind Ulf said. That's amazing. What kind of device is that? I put it back into my pocket. You got to be joking with me, I said. Are you all role-playing the 80s here? Look, Ulf said. I don't know what you're talking about, but we should probably try and find your friends instead of arguing. The island isn't that big, so we should be able to find them pretty quickly. You can sit behind Emma. I sat down behind her. Felix went that way, I said and pointed at his tracks. I still don't know where Tom went. We drove up the hill following Felix's tracks. I held on to the sides of my seat, avoiding grabbing Emma, and almost fell off in the process. A bit further into the forest, we saw a figure to the right and stopped. As it came closer, I saw that it was Tom. Where the fuck have you been? I yelled. He looked at me with tired eyes. I tried to find you, he said. I've been looking for so long. It must have been more than a month. Where did you all go? What the hell are you talking about? I asked. A month? We're looking for Felix. He went searching for his girlfriend. No idea what that was all about, but we're following his tracks now. These kids are helping. You go back to the cottage and get warm, okay? You'll catch pneumonia if you stay outside any longer. You must be freezing. Okay, he said, too tired to talk. Just don't go inside the old lodge, and whatever you do, stay away from the abandoned port west of the island. You went all the way to the other side of the island? I asked. Man, you have a lot of explaining to do when I come back. Just follow our tracks back to the cottages. Okay? He nodded and slowly walked away from us. He'll be all right, I said. Now let's go find Felix. They started up the snowmobiles again and drove up the hill. Felix's tracks continued up a hillside, and at the top they took a sharp left. A few meters ahead, the tracks were cut off. We stopped. I looked at the edge of the tracks, dumbfounded. It was just as if he, together with the entire vehicle, had vanished into thin air. Felix, I yelled. Felix, Linnea, Ulf said to the girl who had sat behind him. I think you and your sister should go back home and... Hell no, she said. Don't try and send us home like we're some kids. We're going to help. This must have something to do with the deer we found last week. I'm convinced it's all connected somehow. The deer. Those sounds. What deer? I asked. Someone better start telling me what's going on here. We found a deer, Ulf said. It was cut in half, chopped up like a dog's dinner. Chopped up, I said. You mean like... It was cut like a loaf of bread, Emma said. And the front of it was missing. The snow around it was covered in blood. But just like these tracks, it was cut off. For crying out loud, I said. Are you suggesting my friend has been turned into freaking salami and kidnapped by aliens? Stop making up stories. Animals get eaten in the wild all the time. Then how do you explain this, Linnea said. Where's the scooter? Did he fly away with it? This isn't natural. And you don't know about all the weird shit that's been going on here lately. It's not just that deer. It's that sound as well. The snow must have fallen off the trees, I speculated. covering up the tracks. Let's drive a bit further up. I'm sure we'll find him there. We blindly continued forward for maybe 15 minutes, after which the snowmobiles got stuck. The snow beneath us was gone, revealing the wet moss and bedrock underneath. It was as if the entire area in front of us had been warmed up from the underneath. "This can't be," I said. "What can have done this?" "We told you," Ulf said. "Something strange is happening on this island." I didn't want to admit it, didn't dare to think about what all of this meant, but there was no denying it anymore. Something unearthly was truly going on here. The moon shone down on us from behind the trees, just as if it had sneaked up on us and exposed our frightened faces. After some hesitation, we continued forward on foot. It was noticeably warmer within the snowless zone, and the air was a bit more humid. "What's this?" Linnea said and pointed at a substance climbing up the bark of one of the trees. "It looks like some kind of slime. Black mold," I said. Tom complained about something similar back at the cabin. Emma removed some of the moss on the ground with her feet. The mold spread out beneath it like a slimy web. "Let's follow it," Ulf said. "Maybe it will lead us to its source." Once we began looking for it, we saw the mold everywhere. It had infested the entire forest. Here and there, we spotted animals that had gotten trapped by it. Most of them were dead, slowly being consumed by the black slime, but a rabbit was still kicking its hind legs in a futile attempt to escape. We inspected it, unsuccessfully trying to figure out what the mold was doing to it, and then Ulf stomped it to death out of mercy. At the same moment, his boot crushed the skull of the small animal. A multitude of screams erupted and echoed through the dark forest. It was almost as if the forest itself screamed in agony through thousands of mouths. We froze in our places until the forest quieted down again. Then we heard something behind us. I slowly turned around. It was a deer running toward us in a rabid fury. Its bones were visible beneath its skin, and instead of eyes there was only black mold. "What is that?" Emma yelled. "Run," Ulf said. "Fucking run." We ran blindly further into the forest, hearing the hooves of the infested deer and its strange, heavy breath behind us coming closer for every second. Emma slipped on some roots and fell to the ground. There was more than one deer now. All their eyes had been eaten by the mold. I had no idea how they could still see us. I stopped and dragged Emma up on her feet again. She was crying for her sister to wait. "She's right in front of us," I said. "Just keep running." She had hurt her knee, but she kept going. There was a splash further ahead, then another one, and only seconds later I fell into a small body of freezing water. Linnea and Ulf had already fallen into it and begun wading through it. Emma stopped at the edge, right before falling in herself. "Jump," I said. "It's not that deep," and there wasn't enough time. One of the deer reached her, ramming her from behind with its sharp antlers. She was thrown into the water headfirst. I felt the warmth of some of her blood landing on my face. I waded out to her and turned her around so that her face wouldn't be under the water. The deer walked right and left at the edge, unwilling to jump into the water to continue their pursuit. I dragged Emma with me to the other side, not knowing what condition she was in. Ulf helped me pull her out of the water while Linnea cried into her hands, too afraid to look at what had happened to her sister. Emma was still alive, but she was losing blood from the deep cuts left in her back from the antlers. "She's alive!" I yelled toward Linnea to give her some comfort. "We need to get her to a hospital as soon as possible." Ulf and I helped Emma up on her legs and put her arms over our shoulders. We struggled forward into the darkness. There was a silhouette of a rectangular structure in the distance, lit up from behind by the setting moon. "What is that?" I asked the others. "It looks huge." "And no idea," Ulf replied as we struggled through the dead, frozen ferns with Emma between us. "It's too large," he continued. "It shouldn't be here." "Let's go there," Linnea said, pushing ahead of us. "We can't turn back. Perhaps there's someone there who can help us." "Come on," Hurry up. She's still bleeding, goddammit. After everything we had seen, I didn't think there would be any help for us over there. But I kept my mouth shut since we didn't have anywhere else to go anyway. There was a large, muddy crater surrounding the structure. The temperature kept raising for every step we took, making us sweat beneath our winter clothes. We didn't stop until we reached the bottom of the crater. From there, we all stared up at the structure in silent astonishment. "My God," I said. "What in the name of all that is holy is that thing?" Linnea fell on her knees crying. I hoped there would be someone here. The structure's seemingly fossilized. Ashy facade looked indistinguishable from the bedrock in shade, but like a work of complex engineering in form. Watching it tower above us aroused a strange sense of doom inside me. It was clear to me that this enormous construction wasn't some secret modern military project. It was ancient and alien. A craft maybe millions of years old, engulfed by the bedrock. "This isn't human," Ulf said. "It must have been here since forever," I said. "Look at—" I interrupted myself. "Well, except the black goo. You see it? It's climbing up against the hull." Listen," Emma said, only barely conscious. "There's something." "What?" Linnea said and turned to me and Ulf. "Shut up, you two. She's trying to say something." She returned to Emma. "What did you—" "Shoo," Emma said. "Listen, something is coming." We fell silent. There was a faint sound coming from the forest, almost like a whisper. Clom, 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 clom. It became louder and louder until it turned into a monotone voice. And then a figure appeared among the dark trees, running toward us. KLOM, 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 KLOM. It was a naked woman, pale as a corpse. Her arms hung limply at her sides, swaying back and forth as she ran, and her dull eyes showed no expression. From her sagging mouth, the same sounds came out over and over and over again. KLOM, 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 KLOM. She tripped on something and violently fell to the ground, but it didn't shut her up even for a second, and she immediately got back up on her feet, without using her arms, and continued to dart toward us with what must have been superhuman speed. "Emma!" Linnea exclaimed. "It's Emma! What are you talking about?" Ulf said. "Emma is right here." But as the woman got closer, we both noticed that Linnea was right. It was Emma, or at least someone who looked exactly like her. Frozen by both fear and confusion, we weren't able to run until Emma, the original one, so to speak, opened her mouth. "That's not me. We need to get away from here. We need to get away from her now." We snapped out of our paralysis and tried to escape the rabid version of Emma running toward us, but carrying our Emma made us slow. We didn't get far until Ulf was rammed and tackled to the ground. They both fell. I used the distraction to quickly grab Emma and drag her behind a thick oak. Linnea panicked and ran toward the structure, the only reasonable hiding place. From behind the tree trunk, I still heard the other Emma repeat her haunting sounds. KLOM, 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 KLOM. She got up just as quick as before and continued in pursuit of Linnea. Relieved, I returned to Ulf. He slowly got up from the ground, moaning out of pain. "How are you, man?" I asked. "Are you hurt?" "And no," he said. "I'm fine." "What was that?" Emma, who was regaining some strength, spoke. "It was a monster, looking exactly like me, and now it's chasing my sister." When we reached the structure, we saw that there was a hole in a section of the wall. It looked like it had been teared open from the inside. As we approached this entrance, we heard Linnea crying inside. Ulf yelled her name, which echoed all the way up to the top through the darkness. A minute later, Linnea yelled back from somewhere deep inside, "I'm in here. Please help me." I yelled for Felix, hoping he was hiding here as well, but there was no response. "Go inside and help her," Emma said. "But leave me here. Just let me rest against the wall until you come back. Okay, just don't be gone for too long." There was a strange buzzing sound inside, coming from all directions, only accompanied by the sound of dripping water. Everything was pitch black. We waded through waist-deep water, yelling for Linnea, but she wasn't answering anymore. We didn't give up, though, and kept going forward. We couldn't see further than a few meters ahead of us, but what we saw still filled us with both wonder and terror. The walls, covered by the black mold, looked like circuit boards made from stone, and here and their whole carcasses had been stuck to the wall by the slime. Some belonged to ordinary animals, such as a half-rotten elk, and some to ancient beasts such as a fossilized mammoth, and others, even older, belonged to completely alien creatures that was hard to even describe. "This is a graveyard," I said. "A place of death." I can't move my left arm," Ulf replied, in tears by the sound of his voice. "What do you mean you can't move your—" "Oh no," he said. "I'm feeling it in my right arm as well now. It's—" A sudden cough interrupted him. I don't feel too well." He coughed again. I don't know KLOM. I immediately stepped back. "Whoa," I said. "What's going on with you, man?" "I'm feeling dizzy, tired. I can't see." He fell silent. "Ulf," I said, slowly stepping even further back. "Hello." He moaned, almost as if he were speaking in his sleep, and then he slowly began to mumble those terrifying sounds. "Clom, clom, clom." "No way, man," I said. "Ulf." His torso twitched and swayed back and forth, and then he came to a sudden stop. "You, Ulf." I tried again. "Tell him." He took a step toward me. I turned around and began to run as fast as I could through the murky water. Ulf had become just like the sick version of Emma, and now he was chasing me, repeating the same sounds.
Clom, 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 clom.
I heard him right behind me. If I kept running, I wouldn't stand a chance. Instead, I took a deep breath and went beneath the surface and swam to the left under the water. Thankfully, Ulf lost sight of me and continued forward. When I resurfaced, I found myself inside a narrow hallway. I didn't dare make a sound, for example by yelling for Linnea. I realized that Ulf must have been infected by the version of Emma that attacked us, that she had turned him into the same mindless shell of a person. It was a fate worse than death. I reached a larger chamber at the end of the hallway. A skeleton, belonging to what must have been an enormous horse, filled the room. There were nowhere to go from here. That's when I heard it, coming from the hallway behind me.
Clom, 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 clom.
It wasn't just Ulf, but Emma too. I ripped one of the bones out of the skeleton and held it up in front of me as a weapon, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Something fell into the water from the ceiling, revealing a beam of light. A hatch had opened up. Just before Ulf and Emma entered the chamber, a rope fell from the opening in the ceiling. A voice told me to grab it. It was Linnea.
Clom, 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 clom.
They were just about to enter the chamber. I grabbed the rope as hard as I could, and just as they were about to knock me down, turning me into one of them, Linnea pulled me up. "Thanks," I said. "That was a close call." Linnea held a metal pipe of some kind in her hand, ready to strike me. "Did they touch you?" she asked. No, I said. "Relax, they didn't get to me. Where have you been? How long have you been here?" she asked, ignoring my question. "Are you from before or now or the future? Tell me how long you've been here." "What are you talking about? We just came here." Linnea lowered her weapon and then her gaze. A tear came down her cheek that fell down the hole and into the water below. She didn't look like before, but it wasn't clear in what way she was different now. One of her front teeth were missing, but that wasn't it. It was something more subtle. I reached out and touched her shoulder. First, she pulled back, but then she relaxed and stepped closer. "We need to find a way out of here," I said. "Emma demanded to be left outside while we looked for you. I'm sure she's fine." "She isn't," Linnea said. "Ah, come on, you don't know that." "I do," she said. "The last time I saw you were 2 years ago, and I've learned a lot during all that time." "How is that possible?" I asked, "What is this place? How?" "I don't know, but this place isn't a spaceship. From what I've gathered, it's something else entirely. It never traveled through space, rather through different worlds. At some point it crashed here and merged with this island, creating shockwaves throughout reality itself. I know it doesn't make sense. I know that, but I can't deny what I've seen." "Interdimensional shockwaves?" I asked, flabbergasted by the suggestion. "Still, if we find a way back, we can save your sister." "Don't you get it?" Linnea said. "This vessel, it messes with the laws of physics. We saw what would happen to Emma before it happened. By now, she's probably already infected. Her fate was already sealed. There would have been nothing we could have done." My head was spinning, trying to understand how it all fit together. "What have you been doing for 2 years?" I asked. "Have you been here all this time?" "No," she said. "I found different openings. The first one led to a desert. Everything was dead there. I don't think life ever evolved there. The second one was the same, but cold instead of hot. Most of the exits led to dead worlds such as those, but eventually I found life, but not of the kind we're used to, and I had to hunt for food there to survive. I always came back to this vessel, trying to find my way back home." "You still haven't?" "A few months back I finally found my way back to the opening we came here through, and while it didn't lead to the same time we arrived, it at least led to the right world, or at least to a world just like the one we came from. But I kept coming back, hoping to find Ulf. He's gone," I said. "I'm sorry." "I know," Linnea whispered. I know. Let's get the fuck out of here," I said. "It's not too late for us yet." Linnea led the way. It didn't take long until we heard it.
Clom, 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 clom.
It was Mindy this time. She was quick and surprisingly agile, even though she too had lost the use of her arms. We ran, jumped over chasms, crawled through tight spaces, and climbed over rotting carcasses, and Mindy still managed to come after us. A bit further ahead, she was joined by Emma and Ulf. They were getting closer, and we were getting more and more exhausted. We ran past an opening in the hull, leading to what looked like a jungle, a monstrosity of some kind. A pale giant with long black hair where its lower body should have been, crawled through the opening just when Mindy was about to reach me. It grabbed her and bit her in half. "This place is leaking in monsters," I yelled. "Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit!" The giant stopped the others too, but it didn't take long for it to turn. With a much deeper voice, it began chanting, "KLOM, KLOM, KLOM, KLOM." It crawled toward us, much faster than it seemed to have been able to at first. It was just about to grab me with its large hand when we jumped down one level, landing in the dark water. From there, I could see the opening. The giant threw itself over the ledge in pursuit, casting waves that made us fall over. It was just a matter of seconds before it would get to us, but luckily it was long enough for us to reach the opening. It was summer outside. The giant couldn't get through the tight opening. It banged on the hull from the inside, creating a loud sound that echoed through the island. I realized it was the sound we had heard before, just when we had arrived. This turned out to be much later, though. Clara's garden was abandoned and overgrown. We saw evidence of military activity. It was just as if there had been a battle here a few decades earlier. We walked past a burnt-out tank and a crashed fighter jet. Inside one of the cabins, while looking for my friends, there was another newspaper on the desk. "The clom fungus has reached America," said the headline. I looked at the year, 2032. I never found Tom or Felix. Most likely, they had fallen victim to the fungus or some of the beasts escaping into our world through the vessel. But I haven't given up hope. Perhaps they found their way into another time or world, where they could not just survive but thrive as well. Linnea found an old sailboat. As soon as we left the island, we got lost in another thick fog. We sailed through it for hours, and when we finally came out of it, the ice floes were back. My phone received a bunch of messages, most of them from my worrying mom. I smiled as I read them, knowing I was finally back in 2025 again. While Linnea started a new life in Stockholm, I've spent most of my time looking for the island again. So far, I haven't been able to find it. I think it's glitching in and out of our dimension. But one day I'll find it, rest assured, and when I do, I'm going to blow that strange, interdimensional vessel to kingdom come. I've been a mail carrier for almost 10 years now. This isn't a city route, not even a small town. I cover the scattered homesteads out in the steppe, places where maybe 2 or 3 houses are still standing. The people there are old, quiet. Some keep goats. Most barely leave the house. They just wait for the weekly delivery, because honestly, it's the only thing still moving between these homes. I liked the job. The steppe is silent. No one rushes. The road is straight, ancient, worn smooth and stripped of markings long ago. I follow it like a thread. Doesn't really matter if I'm awake or dreaming. But 3 weeks ago, a new point appeared on my route, a settlement called Harvest Hill. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there before. I'd never seen it on the schematics, never heard the name from other carriers. But the coordinates were there, clear as day. "Give it a shot," my supervisor said. "Someone subscribed to a paper out there. Just mark it by hand for now." So I went. There was no road. The coordinates pointed straight into a field, like an off-ramp from Route 27. I kept going maybe 5 more miles, just riding through dry grass. And then I saw a stone. Big, flat, cracked like the spine of some ancient creature. Carved into it were the words, "We are the gathered." That was it. No signpost, no houses, no people. The silence was so deep, I could hear my handlebars creaking when I turned. But about 300 meters past the stone, something caught the light. Glass, I thought. Maybe an old car or a rusted water tank. As I got closer, I saw a window. A single house stood in the middle of the steppe, like something out of a dream. Nothing around it, not even a path. But there was smoke coming from the chimney. In the window, someone had hung a piece of cloth. Not a curtain, just a shirt draped halfway across the glass. I didn't even have time to come to a full stop. Someone was already standing at the gate. He wore a simple gray shirt, the kind of thing you'd expect on a farmhand. But it was spotless, almost too clean. He smiled wide with a kind of childlike warmth. "You're here for us?" he asked. "Just delivering some mail," I said. He nodded like he already knew. He didn't even glance at the envelope. "You must be tired. Come in. Joyful Brother will get you something warm." "You're who exactly?" I asked before I could stop myself. "I'm Joyful Brother," he said, like that explained everything. "And you're the guest. That's nice." A woman was already standing in the doorway. She didn't speak. She just gave a small bow, then turned and walked back inside. It was warm inside. The wooden floor shifted a little underfoot, and the walls smelled like dust, like the place had been around for decades. 3 people were already seated at the table. They were smiling. One of them tapped his fingers on a glass of water, not nervously, more like a rhythm. The other, an older man with sun-darkened skin, rocked gently back and forth. I sat down. Someone placed a bowl of porridge in front of me. They called it harvest porridge. It was warm, too warm considering how quickly they'd brought it. "A guest from the road," said Joyful Brother. "That's always a joy, right, silent sister?" The woman sitting to my right smiled but said nothing. She didn't blink. I only noticed that when she took a sip of water, and even then her eyes stayed open. I was about to ask how many people lived here, maybe make small talk, but someone cut me off. "We're very grateful you came," said the one tapping the glass. "Not many folks make it out here anymore, and mail is important." "You knew I was coming?" I asked. "Didn't you?" Joyful Brother looked surprised. "Your letter arrived yesterday." I was about to thank them for the meal and ask how best to get back when Silent Sister stood up. walked to the cabinet and took out an envelope. She held it out with both hands, carefully, like it was something sacred. "This is for you," she said. It was the first time I'd heard her speak. Her voice was soft, but flat, like a radio announcer reading without emotion. The envelope was thin, the paper yellowed. My name was on it. The handwriting, it looked eerily familiar, like mine. Not always neat, with that slight slant in the R's and E's. I didn't open it. Not right away. "Who wrote this?" I asked. "You did," Joyful Brother said calmly. But later, the silence changed. It grew heavier. Everyone was still smiling, but none of them met my eyes. "We don't keep names here," he added. "Only letters." I held the envelope for a long time, turning it over in my hands. No one rushed me, even when I placed it on the table and said, "Can I read it later?" Joyful Brother nodded. "Of course, you're still on the road." The silence wasn't empty, felt dense. Everyone around the table kept smiling, but I could feel something behind those smiles. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe whatever they'd been waiting for had already happened. That's when the lightning flashed. A low roll of thunder echoed behind the hills, and almost instantly, the rain started. Not summer rain, not gentle, heavy, autumn heavy. I walked over to the window. The step beyond the house had vanished. Just a smear of gray grass thrashing against the earth. "Quick, but strong," someone behind me said. "The road's useless now." I nodded without speaking. "We have a room," Joyful Brother offered. "You can stay the night. The sun will dry everything by morning, and you'll ride home just fine." "I don't want to impose." "A guest doesn't impose," said Silent Sister. And for the first time, I heard something in her voice, something like sincerity, but strange, like someone who's already said goodbye to you. The room was simple. A bed, an old chair, a coarse wool blanket. I lay down without undressing, just pulled the blanket over me and tried not to think. The letter was in my jacket. I tucked it away so I wouldn't have to see it. The sound of rain hitting the roof was dull and steady, almost comforting. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up to silence, not to a sound, but to the lack of one. The rain had stopped. No wind, no insects. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Then, far off, right at the edge of my vision, I saw a light. Through the window, just over the grass, beyond the garden, one point of light. Not a lantern, not a car. Something flickered, slowly, like the flame of a candle. I stepped toward the window. The glass was slightly fogged, but I could still see the figure clearly. Someone was standing with their back to me, and they were holding that light. I don't know why, but my first thought was, he's waiting for me. And then another, more disturbing thought followed. He knows I've woken up. I took a step back, and in that moment the figure turned to face me. But I didn't see a face, just darkness, a hollow space where the eyes and mouth should have been. I ran out of the room. The house was empty. The table was still set. The food was still there, but all the chairs were neatly pushed in. "Hey!" I shouted. "Joyful Brother?" No answer. I rushed to the front door. The handle didn't move. The wood was cold and damp, like the door had fogged up from the inside. I yanked harder. Nothing. I ran to the window. It was shuttered from the inside with thick wooden planks. Latched. I tore it open and recoiled. Outside was darkness. Not night, nothingness. Like the step wasn't even there anymore. Then I heard voices. From outside. Soft, half whispers. Several of them overlapping. Like a song without music. I leaned in, trying to catch the words. They repeated. Guest. Letter. Back. Guest. Letter. Back. Then crackling. The first scent of smoke. The wall near the bed darkened. The fire didn't start from below. It was like something had ignited inside the wood itself. I threw myself at the door. slamming into it with my shoulder. I screamed, tore my jacket, searched for anything, no phone, nothing. The air thickened fast. I coughed and felt the oxygen thinning. The floor creaked beneath me. Then a voice behind me. "Why didn't you read it?" I woke up on the floor. My throat burned. I was wheezing, like I'd been screaming for hours. My mouth was full of dust. My hands were covered in ash. The house, it was the same, but it wasn't. The ceiling had collapsed in one corner. The windows were shattered, the frames ripped out. On the table, cobwebs, dry leaves, the broken remains of a plate. I stood up slowly, listening. Nothing, not a sound. The front door was open now, just ajar like a forgotten cellar. I stepped outside. The sun hung low. The sky was overcast. But I could see it, this was the same settlement. Only now it was dead. 3 more houses, all rotting, walls tilted, roofs collapsed. No footprints, no smoke, no faces. I walked a few steps. At the edge of the yard, my bicycle, still locked to an old fence post, coated in dust, but intact. I looked back. Nothing moved. Even the grass stood still. I got on the bike and rode away, without looking back. On the way back, I tried to make sense of it. It all seemed logical in its own way. I probably overheated, got turned around, found an old abandoned house, went in to rest, maybe passed out heat, fatigue, sunstroke. Everything else, just a dream. I mean, I haven't lost my mind, right? When I got home, I checked the map. Harvest Hill wasn't on it. Not even in the old printed archives. I didn't tell anyone. Just figured that route wasn't for me anymore. I called the office and asked to be reassigned. They didn't ask questions. That should have been the end of it. But when I grabbed my jacket from the hallway, I felt something in the pocket. An envelope, yellowed with age. I opened it. Inside was just 2 words, written in my own handwriting. "Come back." And underneath it, the signature, "Joyful Brother." It began on July 2nd of last year. I was traveling for the first time. Unbelievably, I'd never left my hometown until then, so I was excited to say the least. My parents were worried, however. They've lived in our town for their entire lives, never venturing outside of it. But I'm an adult now and have finally moved out, so I decided to celebrate this occasion with my first trip. I picked somewhere just a 30-minute drive from my home, but to me that was still far, far away. My best friend, Jeremy, and I decided to take a river tour with an exceptional view of the mountains and hills. I only wish this memory wasn't tainted by what happened because it was beautiful indeed. Upon arrival, we got in our raft and sat in the chairs. Our tour guide was equipped with a paddle, and he guided us along the river. He had clearly been doing this for a long time, made evident by his tan skin and wrinkles. He guided us effortlessly through the winding river. It was peaceful. So peaceful, I decided I'd take some pictures for memories. A decision I'd soon come to regret. When I attempted to fish my phone out of my jean pockets, well, it slipped. With a plop, it landed right into the water before I even had time to react. I yelled out, "My phone!" The tour guide stopped and looked in my direction. "Hey, can you help me? My phone fell in the water." "I'm sorry, but there's not really anything I can do. These waters are not suitable for diving." I was silent. I didn't know what to say. What was I to do? At least I had my friend with me. Otherwise, I may have had trouble getting home. Maybe my parents were right after all. They'd always warned me that our hometown was safe, and we knew that to be the case, but outside was unknown. Dangerous places lurked out there, and they didn't want me to find them. I was being dramatic. Of course, they were wrong. Millions of people travel every year, and most of them are fine. They're just superstitious and old-fashioned. "Dude, I'm sorry," Jeremy said. "Yeah, it's fine," I said. The rest of the boat ride was awkward and uncomfortable. I could no longer enjoy the pleasant view with the thought of losing my phone in the murky river depths at the forefront of my mind. I made sure to call my parents using Jeremy's phone so they wouldn't worry, or at least worry less. After returning home from the unfortunate trip 4 days later, that's when things started becoming out of the ordinary. I immediately talked to my parents about my phone, reverting back to my fearful ways. There was a comfort in this. But when I told them, my mother said something strange in reply. "Oh, well, that's weird. We just got some texts from you." When? "As soon as you arrived." My heart dropped. How was that possible? Had someone scooped my phone up from the river and stolen it? The tour guide, he must have gotten it right after we left. No, that was silly. I sounded just like my parents. What did it say? It was just a picture. That thought gave me chills. I hesitated. Of what? My mother flipped her phone screen around to face me. A murky brown image. It was definitely underwater. I gulped. What the hell? How is that possible? My mother shook her head. I'm not sure. Maybe it glitched and took a picture when you dropped it. But I dropped it 4 days ago. The phone should be dead by now and suffering from water damage. And this picture was taken with the flash on. I don't even have the flash on usually. It was then I heard the doorbell ring. I hesitantly waltzed over to the door. There stood Jeremy. "Dude, something weird is going on," he said. "Don't tell me you've been getting texts from my phone." Yeah. How'd you know?" "My mom got one too." I was shivering. "What was it?" I asked. "I don't know. It didn't make much sense. It's all jumbled up and gibberish. It looks almost like a drunk text." "Let me see." He handed me his phone. SNSYV. I was dumbfounded. It looked like a text that would be sent if someone was just randomly hitting letters on the phone. "I don't understand. How is this possible? My phone is at the bottom of a river. Do you think somehow somebody got it? Dude, what about the tour guide? Maybe the reason he didn't want to dive in was so he could go retrieve it later. I mean, come on. That dude has to know how to dive." But that still wouldn't explain the strange texts. Okay, maybe he dove in to retrieve the phone, right? And when he was coming up to the surface, he accidentally took a picture while unlocking the phone. You were taking a picture in the messaging app to send to your mom, right? That's right, I was. Exactly. So he could have opened it and mistakenly taken a picture. Okay, that's possible, I guess. But then what about the weird message to you? Well, I mean, come on, the phone has water damage, that's a fact. So I'm sure it's been hard to use, probably has a mind of its own. Maybe that text was unintentional too. My mom interjected. "I think he's right," she said, pointing at Jeremy. "I think we should call the police." So that's what we did. That same day we reported my phone missing and that we had a possible lead on who stole it. But nothing came out of it. The tour guide was searched and they found nothing. We then asked the police if someone could dive in and retrieve my phone. They told us nearly the same thing the tour guide had, that the water was too dangerous to dive in. They said we'd need to wait till they could find the proper machinery and tools to do so, but not to get our hopes up. I'm sure they had more pressing matters than a lost phone. The following day, another text went through. This time it was my dad who received it. UJNSJO, what did these mean? I was beginning to think my phone was being haunted by a CAPTCHA generator. None of this made any sense. I stared and stared at the strange message, contemplating its meaning, when something hit me. The strange correlation I had made in my head with the CAPTCHAs gave me a revelation. CAPTCHAs are randomly generated. This led me to the idea of anagrams. I'd been obsessed with anagrams and codes as a kid, so I decided to put these to the test, dreading what I may find. I found a website that solved anagrams, but none of the words stuck out to me, so I opted for one that solved for multiple words. I hit enter. I scanned the screen through multiple nonsensical pairs of made-up words when I saw one that stood out like a sore thumb. 7 days. My heart stopped. That was the one it had to be. It was the only one that made any sense remotely. But what did that mean? 7 days to what? I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. Already on edge from the first find, I hesitantly entered the second mystery message. This list of possibilities was even shorter. Have you ever experienced being so scared that all the hairs on your neck stand up and tears well in your eyes? That's what I faced when I discovered the only phrase that made sense out of this collection. Join us! I jolted backwards from my computer. This was becoming too much. I tried to calm myself down and convince myself it was just a coincidence. I decided I didn't need to be alone at a time like this, so I powered off my laptop and headed for the living room. I longed for the comfort my parents provided me in unknown situations. When I walked out of my door, I saw something odd. My mother was standing in the corner, her phone pressed hard to her ear as if she was desperate to hear. I could see she breathed heavily as she muttered something to whoever was on the other end. Mom. She didn't react. Mom, who are you talking to? I said as I drew closer. Her shoulders widened and her posture fixed. Oh, it's nothing, honey. Just something for the PDA. Why are you standing in the corner? Oh, well, the service is best right here, don't you think? She said with a grin. Unblinking, without turning my back towards her, I crept backwards into the kitchen. I jolted as someone grabbed me from behind. I then watched my mother run through the house and out of the front door. It's okay, Michael, my father said from behind me. His grip tightened on me. I was unable to free myself. He pushed me towards the open door. It was broad daylight. Surely someone would see this. Someone would stop them. My father moved with a quick pace, like he was in a hurry. I tried to yell, but he clamped his hand upon my mouth. My dad was a strong man, but this felt different. It was like his primal instincts were kicking in. I scanned for any neighbors out, hoping somebody would be outside tending to their lawn and see me, but it was to no avail. My mother swung open the back door of the family car and pushed me inside. Then my father slammed the door shut behind me before hopping into the driver's seat. Frantically, I tried to open the door, but my father locked it before I had a chance. He peeled out of the driveway at an unreasonable speed, knocking down several trash cans, taking off down the road. Please, what's going on? Why are you doing this? My parents said nothing. They just stared straight ahead and grinned. Deep down, I knew where they were headed. I took this very route not too long ago. Only at the speed they were going, they'd get there much quicker than I. My father raced through the pavement, running through red lights and stop signs. I hoped and prayed a cop would try to pull us over, but none did. It was as if they'd all taken the day off. We drew nearer. I dreaded it. I feared what awaited me, what had been calling out to me from the depths. I did not care to face it. There it was, now just within view, was that dreadful river where it all began. I darted my eyes around, searching for an exit. The river drew nearer. In my parents' possessed state of hurry, they didn't tie me up. Maybe they thought they didn't need to, but I took advantage of that. With a huge bump, the vehicle rolled into the grassy bank on the river. I had to do something. Using the bump as momentum, I lunged into the front seat and grabbed the steering wheel. I veered it to the right towards a set of trees. My father's strength was caught off guard by my quick maneuver. He tried to set the vehicle back on its intended course, but it was too late. We came crashing into the trees. Right as we did, I noticed something. In the water was another car, sinking. I recognized those bumper stickers. Jeremy. A large gash formed on my head from the collision. My head spun as I reached for the car's locking mechanism. I pushed the driver's side door open and jumped over my father. He sat unconscious in the driver's seat. My mother grabbed at my feet, yanking at me, trying to pull me back. I trudged forward, both of my shoes flying off. I rolled out the car onto the grassy floor. Without looking back, I ran in the opposite direction. I expected my parents to be chasing me. Because of this, I was extremely hesitant to turn around. When I finally did, I was surprised and horrified to see that they weren't chasing me. They were sinking into the river. I walked onwards back home for several hours as night fell. Finally reaching my home, where the front door still remained wide open, I slammed it shut behind me. I looked at the clock in the kitchen, noticing it was now after midnight. A loud knock at the door drew my attention, and then a sudden realization came upon me. It was now 7 days after I dropped my phone into the river. When Nikki died, she wasn't the only one drowning. I was there too, choking down the same murky water, making the same floundering movements, but unlike my 8-year-old sister, I could swim. Those moments are some of the only things I remember about that day. Dark water filling my throat, then my lungs, a quick flash of something brushing past my foot, and breaking the surface of the water to smell the wretched scent of the river. Nothing else from that night is left in my mind. Not anything from before, and not anything after those moments in the lake. The last thing I really remember was getting out of a car and hearing a woman sobbing. That was 7 years ago. After all that time, I thought that everything was over the day we put my sister's ashes on the mantle. But over the past few weeks, I've started to wake up in the middle of the night. I've been waking up the smell of the river's pollution. Dead fish and sewage work together to invade my nostrils, the same way it was that night on the river. But we moved miles away from the river after Nikki died. My first thought was that it was a type of hallucination. I mean, I've been through the years of therapy. I know how powerful PTSD is. Hell, I've had flashbacks before, but not like this. Because the next night, I woke up with my sheets sopping wet. I didn't even notice it, not at first. The thing that woke me up the second night wasn't the wetness, it wasn't even the smell, although it was still as strong as ever. But it was the sound. The sound of water dripping onto the carpeted floor. My bedspread crying out the moisture that had been left in it. When I heard it, that dripping, crying sound, I remembered. When Nikki died, she wasn't the only one drowning because there were 3 of us there. Libby was the best babysitter I ever had. She always wore all black, and we were the only ones allowed to call her Libby. She explained to me once that she always went by her full name, Libertad, with people in authority, because she never wanted to cave to the powers of white supremacy and assimilate to an oppressive culture. I'll be honest, when I was 12, some of the stuff she said would go over my head. But she never made fun of me for drawing Metal Sonic fighting Sonic EXE, so she was cool. I also think she saved me from getting overly traumatized online at a young age by keeping my attention on creepypasta and not LiveLeak. Libby. So, now that Nikki's asleep, can I show you something? I pulled up my iPad and showed her the digital drawing I made. She craned her head over and asked, "Is that the guy from the Zelda games?" I quickly changed the layer so that the drawing's eyes went black with bloody tears. It was. Now it's been drowned. Do you know who that is? I watched a video on him, and I really shouldn't be showing you this because he might have hacked my iPad, but I've heard of this guy before. He's like a scary spaghetti, right? She tried to be a little vague about it back then, but in retrospect, I'm pretty sure she was just fucking with me. No, he's a creepypasta. It's called that because they're real. Are you sure? Anyone can put anything down on the internet to get a quick scare. And besides, there's not quality control at all. The best scary stories are in books. I looked at her with all the vitriol of a kid in the 2010s being asked to actually read books. She'd do this sort of thing often, try to trick me and Nikki into playing outside instead of on the Wii, or say carrots gave you a health buff to get us to eat better. Nikki was usually gullible enough to believe her, but not me. Sounds lame. And since I was trying to be cool, I added, the only really real ghost stories are the ones that are like first-hand accounts, and books can be like second and third-hand accounts. Okay, fine. I won't make you read. But if you care about first-hand accounts so much, why don't I tell you about something that happened to me? Okay. But how do I know you're telling the truth? She stood up and made the sign of the cross. Cross my heart and hope to die. May the devil take my mind. My face scrunched up. How's that supposed to your story more truthful? Demons only get to you if you let them in. So, therefore, if I'm telling a lie, I just promised the devil he could hang out in my mind as punishment. So that's how you know I'm telling the truth about this one. I was hesitant to believe her, but I also didn't know enough about demonology to dispute her. Okay, so just remember, all of this 100% true. There was a woman once who had a family of 4, 2 children, and a husband whom she loved very much, and they lived alone in a shack near the river. But one day, her daughter got very, very sick, and so did her son. With both their children sick in bed, with an illness no prayer could cure, her husband set out for a doctor. But the woman stayed with her kids, as they got sicker and sicker and sicker. Every day, she fed them broth and bread, and every day they'd throw it up in their beds. Their fevers ran so hot that instead of drying the sheets, she'd wash them in the river and throw them over her children to cool them down. But nothing worked, and it had become a week and her husband still wasn't back. And every day her kids begged for water and more blankets because they were freezing cold in the middle of July. But all the woman wanted was for her kids to be well again. But they couldn't, not without a doctor. And if a doctor wasn't coming, her children were just slowing dying in this shack. So she decided to, help them pass on faster. She gave her kids stones to put in their pockets and dragged them, sickly and staggering, towards the river. And she pushed them under until their cries for water couldn't be heard anymore. And she was, for a moment, at peace, until she saw 2 men on the other side of the river, her husband and a doctor. And then she started to weep and wail, and she threw herself into the river. I found this story in a newspaper clipping while looking up the history of Mexican immigrants to this area in the 19th century. And that story appeared in our town's newspaper in 1873. But the reason that I looked in those records was because I had started hearing weird things when I was walking past the river on the little sidewalk on the bank. But recently, something else happened. Whenever I walked past the river on my way home from your house, I kept hearing these crying noises close by me. And it was so weird, because they sounded like someone was right behind me. But when I looked around, I couldn't see anyone. Before it could happen again, I heard something else. In that moment, it was like a woman was talking directly into my ear. Lo heis por ellos, por ellos. I did it for them, she said. I wanted to run then, I really did. But I kept walking. My head was turning almost 360 degrees though, trying to see who was talking to me. I wish that I had kept my eyes forward, focused on sidewalk. But because I turned my head enough, I saw someone. Someone in the distance who I thought was standing on the opposite riverbank. But after a second, it looked more like she was walking on the water. And when she started coming towards me, the sound of crying got more and more distant. As the sounds of crying and pleading started to recede, I could make out her features in better detail. Her hair was long and black, streaming around her shoulders. She wore a light blue gown, and water streamed from her face and eyes. In a weird way, I recognized her. I recognized her not because I knew about her story yet, but because I'd always heard the stories of her. She was La Llorona, the weeping woman, the wailing mother. Distantly, as she continued her gliding approach, I heard her say, "Eerie's mi hija? Are you my daughter?" And it was then that I did run. I ran away from the river and into the neighborhood of houses near it until I was a quarter of a mile away from it. I only stopped because I almost collided into a guy on a hoverboard. That was a few months ago, but it's the reason I drive home now instead of walking by the river. When she had finished, I didn't think about how she had always driven her car back home. I didn't think about the logistics of a Mexican family immigrating to Ohio in the 19th century, or the fact that our shitty library didn't have records that stretched back that far. I could only think about how the river was only 2 blocks away. Libby had scared the shit out of me with her story, and I was convinced of its truth. Even if it hadn't been true before that moment, it was like she spoke the words into a reality of their own. That fact became even more real to me, when I started to hear the muffled sounds of someone crying close by. I jumped off the couch and turned to Libby, whose shocked expression showed me she heard it too. It was then that Nikki crawled out from behind crawl space between the wall and the couch and threw herself at Libby, crying, "Is it true? Is there a scary girl in the river? Oh my God, Nikki. Hey, it's supposed to be your bedtime. Let's get you to your room. Okay?" She clutched my sister closer to her, and they made quite a pair. Libertad, in all black, looking guilty for scaring the child she hadn't meant to, and Nikki, in her green Minecraft PJs, sobbing her eyes out. In another hour, it was 10:30, we had gotten Nikki to go back to sleep, and I was in my room, listening to Libby talk to my mom in the living room. They were talking about Nikki, and while at first I thought it might be about her accidentally overhearing the story, I quickly got bored. My mom was just talking about taking Nikki to the doctor tomorrow. My little sister had kept complaining about being sore, and napped a lot more these days, but I thought she was just being dramatic, because it coincided with the start of her ballet lessons, which she hated, and would do anything to get out of. I'd actually helped her get out them one time by throwing a ball at her foot really hard. She hadn't asked me to, and I did initially do it because she was annoying me, but she got to skip that day anyway. All these years later, I recognized that Nikki's fatigue and frailty were the result of the overabundance of white blood cells in her system. Her little body had started attacking itself, and she was entering the first stages of leukemia. Even with the onset of her chemo treatments, she would just keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker. When we fell in the river together, I was the one that survived. But the sickness in Nikki's bones became the stones that weighed her down, until they were heavy enough to drag her into the water's depths. The water hasn't stopped appearing. When I started writing this whole account, I thought that airing out a little of the past would be enough to get me through this weird mental break I'm having. But the water hasn't stopped coming into my room at night. My parents are convinced that it's an issue with the plumbing. How the hell can it be an issue with the plumbing? I'm on the second fucking floor. So before I went to sleep last night, I crept into the basement and turned off all the water in the house. I then proceeded to check all of the taps, and nothing flowed when I turned them on. Satisfied, I went to bed, but woke up in the morning soaked to the bone, and when I checked the water main, the handle was still covered in a layer of dust. I thought that I was working through my trauma. I had stopped needing to see my therapist a year ago. Even though my CPTSD was identified, I had never needed to have been medicated for it. So why now? Tonight, in my desperation, I'm going to drive to the river. It'll be the first time I've been back since that night. I need to know that there is no weeping woman, because then I can truly forget about that night. When I got to the river that night, I didn't see Libby's La Llorona. There was no Mexican pioneer woman that appeared on the river that night. My weeping woman was worse. I had to drive to the river, and when I got out of my car, the sun had just set on the horizon. I didn't encounter any joggers or cyclists out on this stretch of the river. It was a little too precarious for that. The sidewalk here hadn't been updated in decades, even after I was dragged out of it. But at least there were some of those shitty, solar-powered streetlights alongside the crooked path. I thought it was funny because instead of the lights making the jagged concrete look better, it just brought out the deformities. I had walked about a quarter mile away from my car at that point, kicking loose stones as I went, until I heard it.
I'm sorry.
Someone was crying in the distance. It was so far in the distance that I couldn't help but wonder if I heard it at all. I looked to the river and desperately searched for a figure on the opposite bank. But the crying had gotten even quieter now, and I almost turned back to head to my car when I heard the second noise. It was a slow, deliberate drip. As it got louder, the sound of crying almost disappeared. In that moment, the smell of the river reached me again. That stench that had kept haunting me was almost unbearable now, but something had changed in it. It hadn't just gotten stronger, but rather deeper as well. There was a strange undercurrent of rotting to it. Not just the regular rot of fish, but the rot of red meat. It was then that I turned around to see a woman standing less than 5 feet away from me. She was soaking wet, dressed in a light blue hospital gown. Her long black hair was soaking wet, and she looked slightly bloated, as if she was swelling out of her gown. Her body moved as if she was compressing in on herself, crying. In mere seconds, I could tell that was where the true source of the dripping was coming from. Water streamed from her eyeless sockets in rivulets, the color of it dark and murky. She smelled like what she was, a waterlogged corpse. And yet, none of this was what truly scared me about her. What shook me deep into my core and had me tear my feet from the pavement and start running was one thing, more difficult by far to process than anything else. I recognized her. The woman that I ran away from on the riverfront that night was the one person who could always scare me. It was Libby who sobbed that night. The further I ran from her, the louder and louder and louder her wails became, until I slammed my car into drive and hopped a Meridian to get away from the river. It was only then that it all stopped. The wailing in my ears had finally stopped, but the questions that crossed my mind kept streaming by. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a social media post. Even though I never used it, I ended up opening Facebook at 3 a.m., searched Libertad Herrera, and after finding no results, simply typed in Herrera and found someone that looked like she could be Libby's mom. And after clicking on her page to be greeted immediately with Libby's smiling face, it was confirmed. The post that Libby's mom had made was an in memoriam for her daughter. I had to translate the page from Spanish before I could read it properly, but I was only half surprised by what I saw next. After a long battle with her mental health, Libertad has joined the other saints in heaven. I stopped reading for a moment, the memory of a voice ringing out in my ears. You'll go to heaven. Oh my God. I'm sorry, but you'll go to heaven. Libby had been acting strange. She had stopped trying to get me to build healthier habits, and I could tell because my parents had her watch me more as they shuttled Nikki between appointments, sometimes in other cities. She would still smile and talk to me if I asked her questions, but there was something lacking in her eyes. I didn't really notice though, because I had started to read my way through the Goosebumps series and was surprised how good they actually were. But one day she just didn't watch me or Nikki anymore. I asked my mom about it, and she told me Libby wasn't feeling well. I asked her if Libby was sick like Nikki was sick, and my mom got really quiet. No, it's not my place to say, but listen, I want you to know that even though your dad and I are spending a lot of time with Nikki right now, it doesn't mean we don't still love you. And if you ever have bad, if you feel like you're alone, tell us, because we love you and we want you to be safe and to feel happy. I wasn't happy. My sister had cancer and my cool babysitter was gone. But if I said that, it would make my mom upset. So, like a very mature 12-year-old, I hugged my mom and told her I'd always look out for Nikki because that's what she needed to hear. There was a good day, a day when Nikki was out of the hospital and walking fine, that our parents took us to the river to walk. I joked with my sister about how bad it smelled. We were a while ahead of our parents and made a game out of throwing stones into the river, but it devolved into Nikki collecting the pebbles she thought were cool. But after a second, Nikki shrieked with joy and raced towards someone walking our way, leaping to hug them. Nikki, leave them alone, I said before I recognized who she had approached. It was Libby. She looked awful. There were bags under her eyes, and they kept shifting back and forth between us and the river. Her posture was slumped, and the way she held herself was completely different. I don't even think she recognized us for a while. Hey Libby, how are you? I asked, trying to keep my excitement down. Nikki was still clinging onto her like a burr, so I walked within arm's reach of them. I forget. Her voice was a strange combination of absent-minded and keenly invested. Trace, Nikki, you guys are baptized, right? What? No. I took Nikki's hand, pulled her closer towards me. I knew Libby was weird, that was what had made her cool to me. But this was different. It was like she was possessed. And just like that, the serpent slithers deeper, she said, as if this was a totally normal conversation. "Libby, are you okay? My parents are just down the road. If you need to talk to them." She shook her head. No, I'm okay. And you guys will be too, right? I'm glad to see that you're doing better, Nikki." My sister giggled in response. "Can you pick me up, please?" Libby smiled, picked Nikki up in her arms, and chucked her into the river. In that moment, it was like I had been punched in the gut. My sister was so small and weaker still from her sickness. She went into the water flailing about and screaming in a mixture of joy and fear. I couldn't even comprehend what had just happened. She had flown out of Libby's arms with such force it didn't seem real. But nonetheless, I hesitated at the edge of the river. "I'm sorry, but you'll go to heaven?" Libby rocked forward on the balls of her feet. "I can't. The devil made a home in my head. You'll go to heaven. Let's go." She took me by the arm, and I couldn't resist the vice-like grip that forced me to the river with all the grace of John the Baptist. My parents were running closer and closer, but all I could think about was Nikki in the water. And so I followed where I was led and went to rescue my sister from heaven. But when I fell, the current pushed me under, and I couldn't see anything. Opening my eyes just leads to pain and darkness. Silt rushed under my eyelids and past my lips. I was vaguely aware of a thrashing shape near me, but as I was doubled over under the water again, my only desire to reach the surface, I struggled to shore, and not even the small hand that brushed past my foot could make my brain overpower my selfish instincts. After all of that, it only made sense that she was hospitalized. In a moment of complete unreality, she had been responsible for my sister being taken to her grave, not by cancer, but by the river's waters. I remember all the details of the drowning now. My memory is whole again, but I'm still missing something, because the water hasn't stopped. Even now, it's the middle of the night and I'm writing all of this down instead of sleeping, praying that it won't happen again. I know that if I tell my parents, my mom will want to call a psychiatrist and my dad will call a priest. But I don't know if I can trust either of those options right now, because I can hear crying again, as if she's right next to me. I have to write this down, maybe just to prove to myself later that it happened, maybe as some kind of futile warning tossed into the void. Typing helps steady my hands, gives the shaking somewhere to go. The doctors use terms like acute stress reaction, dissociative features, easy labels, but they haven't seen the tiny, intricate brand mark that appeared on my wrist this morning, shaped like one of those figures. It started mundanely enough. Nobody gets real mail anymore, right? It's all emails, junk flyers, bills. So the plain manila envelope sitting innocuously in my mailbox a few months ago felt odd. No address, no stamps, no return label. Just my name, written dead center in precise, neat block letters unlike any handwriting I recognized. Not a birthday card envelope, just standard office supply stuff. That detail unnerved me immediately, though I couldn't say why. The flap wasn't sealed, just tucked in. Inside, wrapped in plain tissue paper, were two small objects. They tumbled into my palm, surprisingly heavy, cool to the touch. Clay figures, crudely sculpted yet disturbingly detailed. I examined the first one. It depicted a figure, genderless, featureless beyond basic human shape, tied with intricate bindings to a simple wooden chair. The chair sat in the middle of what looked like a damp stone cellar, rough walls, earthen floor. The figure was slumped forward, head bowed, straining against the ropes. The level of detail in the tiny, sculpted ropes was unnerving. My brow furrowed. Weird. Some kind of bizarre art project? A misplaced delivery? Why was it sent to me? I turned my attention to the second figure, hoping for context. My breath hitched. The air punched out of my lungs. It was a figurine of me, unmistakably. Same rough sculpt style, same scale, same damp cellar setting. But this figure wasn't just tied. A tiny clay hand, clearly not its own and rendered in a slightly different, darker clay, held its head wrenched back by the hair, forcing the blank face upwards. The features were mine, distorted in a rictus of terror or pain. Slack-jawed, eyes wide but empty, my stomach churned. I dropped both figures onto the kitchen counter as if burned. My brain refused to process it. It had to be a prank. Incredibly sick, elaborate prank. But who and how? How could someone capture my likeness so accurately in crude clay, depict me in such a horrifying scenario? I don't post many pictures online, certainly none that could be used for this. I thought about calling the police, then hesitated. What would I show them? 2 weird clay figures? They'd laugh me out of the station. No crime had been committed, technically. It was just deeply, profoundly disturbing. I needed to forget it, pretend it didn't happen. I swept the figures into the trash, buried them under coffee grounds and vegetable peels, and tried to force them from my mind. Can you blame me? A week later, another manila envelope arrived. Same block lettering, same tucked flap, same lack of postage or address. My first instinct was pure revulsion. Toss it, burn it, don't look. No way did I want to see another grotesque tableau featuring my clay counterpart. I wish, to whatever higher power might exist, that I had listened to that instinct. I wish I'd burned the envelope unopened, but I didn't. Some morbid compulsion, some desperate need to understand even while dreading it, made me open the flap. It wasn't possession, wasn't external control. It was me, my own trembling fingers pulling out the next 2 clay figures. And I will regret that weakness until the day the final figure becomes reality. Like before, a pair. Like before, set in that damp stone cellar. Like before, one depicted my clay doppelganger. But this time, good grief, even typing this makes my hands shake. This time, the figure of me was clearly brutalized. Face pummeled, clay dented and smeared with something dark and reddish-brown that looked sickeningly like dried blood. One sculpted arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The dark clay hand still held the hair, but the head lolled lifelessly. The second figure, it showed the other figure, the tormentor, or at least its hand and arm. The dark clay hand held a tiny, intricately sculpted pair of pliers. The rusted-looking tips of the pliers were clamped onto a minuscule shard of white, a tooth, emerging from the ruined face of the me figure. The implied violence was visceral, immediate. I nearly threw up right there in the hallway. Panic clawed at my throat. I paced the apartment like a caged animal, needing to move, needing to escape, but with nowhere safe to go. Who was doing this? Why? Were they watching me right now? The paranoia was suffocating. I felt trapped, not just in my apartment, but in my own life, suddenly vulnerable to an unseen, malicious artist. That was the first full-blown panic attack I'd ever had. My friends found me later, curled up on the kitchen floor, hyperventilating, unable to explain coherently what was wrong. Desperate for validation, needing someone else to see, I tried to show them the figures. I retrieved them from the trash, ignoring the coffee grounds sticking to them. They looked and saw nothing, just crude lumps of gray and dark clay, featureless, meaningless. "Dude, what is this?" my friend asked, confused. Some kind of weird pottery project gone wrong? The detailed horror, the ropes, the pliers, my own face, they were completely invisible to anyone but me. Felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I wasn't just being tormented. I was being gaslit by reality itself. Pics or it didn't happen took on a horrifying new meaning. I knew with chilling certainty that involving the police now was pointless. Who would believe me? The next time an envelope arrived, I tried photographing the figures with my phone. The one after that, I tried recording video as I opened it. Useless. The photos showed blurry shapes or just my hand holding indistinct lumps. The video files corrupted instantly, refusing to play back. sometimes deleting themselves entirely from my device storage. Whatever force was behind this controlled not just the delivery, but the documentation too. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was this elaborate self-delusion? Was I making these figures in some fugue state and then mailing them to myself? No logical explanation fit. Meanwhile, the figures delivered weekly in their plain envelopes grew progressively worse. Each depicted a new stage of meticulous, horrific violation visited upon my clay effigy. Branding with strange symbols, limbs removed or rearranged, things I can't bring myself to write down. The stress became unbearable. Sleep was impossible, food tasteless. Going to work felt like walking through a minefield, scanning every face for a sign of the tormentor. Checking the mail became an act of sheer terror, often delegated to neighbors or friends who just saw plain envelopes, sometimes empty, sometimes containing what they described as weird, lumpy rocks. Every envelope delivered to me, however, held its specific, personalized horror, visible only to my eyes. I felt like I was marching towards an unavoidable, painful end, detailed one clay figure at a time. Promises of violence. One friend insisted I needed professional help. Maybe they were right, but I became convinced that if I couldn't prove the figures existed, I could at least prove someone was delivering the envelopes. I could take that to the police. I ordered a security system, motion-activated floodlights, high-res cameras aimed at my mailbox and front porch, installed extra deadbolts, window locks. I spent an entire Saturday setting it all up, testing angles, feeling a fragile sense of control return. I would catch this person. I would get proof. Sure enough, around midnight a few days later, my phone pinged. Motion detected at the front porch. The new floodlight blazed, washing the small area in harsh white light. I watched the live feed on my phone, heart pounding. A figure stepped into the light. Average height, indeterminate build, wearing dark, loose clothing and a plain, blank white mask, the kind used in theater, utterly featureless. They moved with an unnerving stillness, angling themselves deliberately so the floodlight created glare, obscuring details, casting their form mostly into silhouette. A shadow of death. Indeed, they stood motionless before the camera for what felt like an impossibly long time, maybe 5 minutes. Then, with agonizing slowness, they reached into a simple cloth bag slung over their shoulder. They pulled out a small clay figurine. My breath caught. The figure held the figurine up, turning it slowly, deliberately, towards the camera lens, as if ensuring it was captured clearly. Even on the phone screen, I recognized the scene instantly, the latest, most brutal depiction yet, the one showing the final act of dismemberment promised by the escalating series. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I watched, transfixed by horror, as the masked figure carefully placed the figurine on my doorstep. Then, they simply turned and walked calmly away, disappearing into the night beyond the floodlight's reach. I saved the footage immediately, checked it, backed it up. It was clear. The figure, the mask, the figurine being placed, undeniable proof. Maybe not proof of the figurine's horrifying detail visible only to me, but proof of the harassment, the trespass, the deliberate torment. I took the footage to the police station the next morning. The desk sergeant watched it patiently. He frowned, ran it back, zoomed in. "Okay," he said slowly, looking up at me with pitying eyes. "I see the motion light triggered. I see, well, it looks like maybe some leaves or trash blowing onto your porch triggered it. Then blowing away again. What? No, the figure, the mask, the figurine they left." I insisted, pointing frantically at the screen playback he was showing me. He sighed. "Son, there's nothing there. Just the light coming on, some wind maybe. No person, no mask, no figurine. The timestamp shows the light was on for about 5 minutes, then off. That's it." The security footage, clear as day on my phone just hours before, now showed exactly what he described. An empty porch, the light switching on and off. The figure, the figurine, completely gone from the recording they were viewing, and when I checked my phone again, gone from my copy too. Corrupted. Wiped. The police filed a basic report mentioning my distress but stated clearly, no evidence of trespass or harassment found. Useless. Utterly useless. I was trapped, isolated, terrified, and whatever was doing this could apparently alter digital records as easily as it sculpted clay. That was weeks ago. As I said, I'm writing this because I know the end is near. The masked figure has been on my doorstep every night since the camera incident. Sometimes silent, sometimes leaving a new figurine, each depicting the final moments. The last one, it showed the cellar empty, the chair overturned, just scattered clay remnants. Completion. I know with bone-deep certainty that once the narrative in the clay is complete, the figure will come for me for real. Locks won't matter. Cameras won't matter. Nothing will. It will get in. It will take me. It will enact every scene from those horrible little sculptures. I don't know why. I don't know how. Only that it's inevitable. My friends have stopped calling. My withdrawn paranoia pushed them away. No family nearby. Just me alone in this apartment waiting, like the figure in the clay. So, if you're reading this maybe months or years from now, maybe after someone finds this laptop, know that it happened. I didn't imagine it. The figure, the envelopes, the clay promises of pain, they were real to me. I don't know if you'll believe it, but please do me one favor. Remember my name. Remember I existed before I became just another piece of forgotten clay in a dark cellar. I'm so alone, so afraid, and I know I'm about to disappear. I just don't want to be forgotten, too. That feels like the final violation. Last year, before heading off to university, I needed a temporary job. Saw a notice pinned up in the campus library, evening shift assistant needed, mostly reshelving and processing returns. Sounded easy enough, quiet work. Mrs. Gable, the head librarian, a stern woman with sharp eyes behind thicker glasses, hired me on the spot after a brief chat. She also introduced me to her daughter, Cleo, who apparently helped out a few evenings a week. Cleo knows the stacks like the back of her hand, Mrs. Gable had said with a thin smile. Cleo was peculiar, petite, maybe a year or two younger than me, with unnervingly large, dark eyes and movements that were sometimes slightly too quick, almost blurry at the edges. The first thing she said to me, bypassing any greeting, was, "Hey, can you hear this?" She then tilted her head, focused intently on me, and produced a faint, rapid clicking sound. It wasn't vocal. It seemed to emanate from somewhere behind her teeth, like chattering, but faster, almost insectal, all while holding a wide, slightly vacant smile. It was deeply unsettling. Cleo seemed maybe neurodivergent, or perhaps just desperate to appear quirky and interesting. I just nodded awkwardly and tried to roll with it, figuring she was attempting to break the ice in her own unique fashion. The rest of that first shift involved minimal interaction, mostly just quiet shelving. Maybe a week into the job, I discovered her hiding place. I was working in the lower basement level, the deep stacks, a maze of towering metal bookshelves. I'd gone down a particularly narrow aisle when I heard quiet giggling, muffled, seeming to come from inside the shelving unit itself. It made me jump. "Cleo?" I called out hesitantly. The giggling stopped. A panel on the side of one of the large, mobile compact shelving units, the kind you move with a hand crank to create an aisle, slid open a crack. Cleo's large eyes peered out from the darkness between tightly packed rows of old periodicals. Her legs were drawn up to her chest, somehow squeezed into the impossibly narrow gap. "What are you doing in there?" I asked, annoyance mixing with unease. I was trying to work. She was messing around. "Just checking the alignment," she replied cheerfully, her voice echoing slightly from within the compressed space. "Right? Okay. I didn't buy it. I'd seen the maintenance crew service those units just yesterday. She wriggled out with unnerving flexibility, like a contortionist, earning a startled glance from a student studying at a nearby corral. No harm done, I supposed. Just weird. The next incident was less harmless. A few days later, a young professor came down to the deep stacks looking for some obscure journals, her young son trailing behind her, bored and restless. She didn't know how the compact shelving worked, so I was showing her how to use the crank to open the correct aisle. Her son, maybe 5 or 6, was wandering nearby. As I was explaining the locking mechanism, I heard Cleo's distinctive soft clicking sound from the next aisle over, followed by the little boy giggling. An uneasy feeling prickled my gut. Knowing Cleo's oddness, leaving a small child unsupervised near her felt irresponsible. "Excuse me, I'll be right back," I told the professor, leaving her to browse the newly opened aisle. I rounded the corner and froze. Cleo was half-crouched beside the crank mechanism of another closed shelving unit, one notoriously heavy and stiff to move. The little boy stood before it, holding a handful of shiny pebbles Cleo must have given him. Cleo was making the rapid clicking sound with her teeth, her eyes wide and fixed on the boy, head tilted in that unnervingly focused way. "What do I do now?" the boy asked excitedly. "Just turn the handle," Cleo explained slowly, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. "Turn it until the aisle opens up wide, like a secret passage." I realized with horror what she was doing. Those mobile shelves weigh hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds when fully loaded. If that child somehow managed to turn the heavy crank and open the unit while someone was inside. "Cleo," I snapped, hurrying towards them. "But what's inside?" the boy asked, reaching for the crank.
À surprise.
Cleo chirped, her clicking intensifying slightly. I reached them just as the boy put his hand on the crank handle. I grabbed his shoulder gently. "Hey bud, these aren't toys. They can be dangerous," I said, steering him away. Cleo glared at me, the playful look vanishing instantly, replaced by cold annoyance. The boy, losing interest, scampered back towards his mother, who was engrossed in her journals, oblivious. "What did you think you were doing?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Just playing," Cleo shrugged, the vacant smile returning. "Chill out. He wasn't strong enough to open it anyway." I wasn't so sure. I walked away, shaken, knowing I should report this to Mrs. Gable. But later that evening, when Mrs. Gable came down to check on things, I hesitated. She was praising Cleo for meticulously reorganizing a section, beaming at her daughter with such oblivious pride. How could I explain? She wouldn't believe her daughter would endanger a child. I hadn't even gotten my first paycheck yet. I needed the money for tuition deposit. Against my better judgment, I let it slide, a decision I still regret with nauseating intensity. A few days later, Cleo and I were working the closing shift together. It was near midnight, the library deserted except for us. I was sorting returned books onto a cart when she materialized silently beside me. "Do you like me, Alex?" she asked abruptly. I frowned, avoiding her gaze, focusing on aligning book spines. "Yeah, sure, Cleo. You're fine." The lie felt clumsy, transparent. "Then why don't you ever really look at me?" I forced myself to turn, to meet her large, dark eyes. "What do you mean? Do you like me?" Her face was suddenly serious, the usual faint quirk of a smile gone. Her eyes seemed darker, deeper. There was an unnerving stillness about her. My mouth went dry. "Yes," I croaked out. "Liar." The word was soft, almost gentle, but it landed like a physical blow. I felt my awkwardness curdle into genuine fear as she started making that rapid clicking sound again. Louder this time, more rhythmic. Her eyes seemed to lock onto mine, and the periphery of my vision started to blur, like I was suddenly looking down a tunnel. I tried to step back, but my legs felt heavy, disconnected. They wouldn't obey. Instead, seemingly of their own volition, They followed her as she began to walk slowly backward, towards the rows of compact shelving units against the far wall. Panic rose in my chest. I knew where she was leading me. The clicking sound filled my head, hypnotic. Her playful, vacant smile returned as she sensed my rising fear. "Don't worry," she said, her voice seeming to echo from far away, though she was only feet from me. "It's just a quick check." Her clicking eyes never left mine as we reached one of the largest, heaviest units. Without looking away from me, she reached behind her and expertly spun the crank, opening a narrow aisle between two walls of densely packed books. She stepped sideways into the gap, then beckoned me with one hand, her movements unnaturally fluid. In my peripheral vision, her hand seemed to blur, moving faster than it should. Her head stayed perfectly fixed, eyes locked on mine, the clicking sound insistent, drilling into my brain. Once she was fully inside the narrow space, her voice echoed slightly from between the shelves. "Now close it up, nice and tight." I felt utterly powerless, like a puppet on strings. I watched, horrified, as my own hands reached out, grasped the cold metal crank handle, and began to turn it. The heavy unit groaned, moving slowly, closing the aisle, compressing the space where Cleo stood. The panic inside me was a physical pressure, making me want to retch, but my body continued its task, cranking the shelf tighter and tighter. My finger moved towards the locking lever. I desperately hoped it wouldn't engage, that the unit was too full, that something would stop it. But as Cleo softly commanded, "Lock it," the lever clicked home smoothly, sealing the unit shut. I heard the air hiss out from the compressed space within. Through the narrow vertical gap where the edges of the mobile shelves didn't quite meet, I could see her face, pale in the dim light. Her head hadn't moved an inch, despite the compressing shelves. Her wide, dark eyes stared directly into mine, unblinking. I remembered a documentary about owls, how their heads remain uncannily stable while their bodies move, fixing their prey with an unwavering gaze. Cleo's face reminded me exactly of that. Just this pale, wide-eyed face staring back at me through the gap, the clicking sound finally silent. She must have held me there like that, watching her in the compressed darkness, for a long time, maybe half an hour? I lost track. The floor seemed to vibrate slightly. Then, suddenly, the main fluorescent lights directly overhead flickered violently. Once, twice, before stabilizing. In that brief moment of flickering darkness, the connection, the compulsion, snapped. My eyes lost sight of hers. I blinked, hard, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The top halves of my eyeballs felt scraped raw as tears finally welled, blurring my vision. Suddenly in control of my own limbs again, feeling foggy and nauseous, I stumbled backward, away from the sealed shelving unit. I heard Cleo's voice call softly from within. "Alex, where are you going? Open it back up." But I wasn't falling for it again. My brain felt scrambled, my legs unsteady. For a terrifying second, I thought about trying to reverse the crank, but realized it was locked tight now. And besides, did I really want to release whatever Cleo truly was? Whatever she was, it wasn't human. I dreaded to think what she had planned next, had the lights not flickered. I half ran, half stumbled past Mrs. Gable's darkened office door, praying she wouldn't emerge. Thankfully, it remained shut. I fumbled with the keys at the main staff exit, burst out into the cool night air, and didn't look back. I never returned, never picked up my final paycheck. When my parents asked why I'd quit so abruptly, I mumbled something about needing more time to study, an excuse they readily accepted. A few weeks ago, haunted by the memory, needing some kind of closure or proof I hadn't imagined at all, I finally mustered the courage to check the university library's website. They had live webcam feeds for some sections, mainly for security monitoring. I found the link for the basement archive feed. The low-resolution image showed the familiar rows of shelving units in the dim light. I navigated the clumsy online controls, panning the camera view slowly, until I found it the heavy compact shelving unit I'd sealed Cleo inside. My breath hitched. I zoomed in as much as the feed allowed. The gap between the shelves was barely visible. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A pale shape within the gap. A face, staring directly, unblinkingly, back at the webcam lens. Wide, dark eyes in a pale face. Cleo, utterly still, waiting. I slammed my laptop shut, heart pounding, feeling sick. It hadn't been a hallucination. She was still in there. Or, at least, her face was still staring out from that compressed, book-lined prison. I haven't been able to use the library since. Every time I see rows of shelves, I see her face staring back at me from the shadows between the books.